A boy named Jake loves to play computer games, especially the game War of the Gods. His friends don't understand him. They make fun of him, tease him, saying he's wasting his time and money. They even start calling him names. Jake really spent a lot of money on the game. However, his character is also very remarkable compared to the others. His character in the game is so cool that it's not worth a single penny invested. The character's name is Freeplay. Only one problem bothers Jake: there are too few users in the game. One day, Jake went into the game and met up with other regulars who had gathered in the square. The first to greet him was the fluffy pink rabbit, noticing that he was late. Jake replied that he had been playing the game the day before, which is why he slept late. Next, the leader in time spent in the game with the nickname Modny Joseph spoke up. He teased Freeplayer that he kept promising never to play again, but then he came anyway. The hero didn't stay in debt and replied that fashionable Joseph was the same. The Freeplayer was also greeted by the first sword of Joseon, and the character Only I Don't Have a Cat. The latter was Jake's closest friend among the players, and they always tried to be together during raids. The characters weren't doing anything special. They were just chatting. The fashionable Joseph suggested a raid, but it didn't arouse much enthusiasm. Everyone started discussing the game's shortcomings. There were few players. The game sucked from the moment the server opened. The controls were weird, and the tasks were too difficult. But Freeplayer with First Sword of Joseon argued that this was the point, because the higher the difficulty, the more enjoyable the rewards. And if the game were easy, it wouldn't be interesting. Then, Freeplayer was asked if it was true that he was making money on cryptocurrency and was spending it all on the game. At the same time, Rabbit teased him, calling him a liar. Because what kind of Freeplayer invests money in the game? He, laughing, assured that in his heart he feels like a freestyler. The conversation was interrupted by a system message that the game, War of the Gods, had been nominated for a competition. The friends looked at each other in alarm. The rabbit wondered if this meant the server was going to be shut down. The next message confirmed her fears. The friends were stunned. Then they all started shouting indignantly that it was unfair, especially towards Freeplayer, because he had invested the most in the game. Another message announced cost reimbursement. Friends were still asking questions, but there were no answers. The countdown to the server closing began. The players couldn't believe their eyes. Some were outraged. Someone just blinked in confusion. Jake was simply amazed. He tried to convince himself that any game ends sooner or later, but it didn't help much, because he had dedicated many years to this game. He remembered the exciting raids he and his friends had gone on, and intoxicating victories, and I decided that I couldn't let the server shut down. But what could I do? The last message appeared on the screen, saying that there were 10 seconds left before the shutdown, and then Jake was surprised to realize that the time was up, but the monitor hadn't turned off. There, in the glow of light, a mysterious figure appeared. It seemed to be a woman. The charming woman was named Nell. The Freeplayer assumed it was an administrator. She didn't object. She explained that she had come to personally thank him for supporting the world she had created. The guy was confused and surprised because his financial investment was not charity. Nell understood. But it turned out that it helped the game get into the competition. The Freeplayer didn't understand anything at all. What kind of competitions are there if there's no information about them on the internet? Nell refused to explain anything but awarded him a special privilege. When asked to explain, she did not disclose the details but wished to enjoy the award. Then, as if remembering something, she added that Jake should take everything seriously and not doubt anything. That would help him survive. The computer screen instantly went blank. While Jake was trying to understand what had happened, the system issued another message, warning that changes would begin that could be shocking. Jake didn't have time to get really scared before he was immediately sucked into a raging whirlwind. Everything was spinning. He was picked up and in an instant thrown face down, and the system began to issue notifications that he had received a special privilege and Freeplayer inventory. That synchronization is currently underway, and there are more than 5 years left until its completion. And finally, a message appeared that the game War of the Gods could be started. A large crowd gathered near the Otrin Palace. It is located in the dimension of the Kingdom of God and is inhabited by the lesser gods. There was an announcement that Nell had won first place in the War of the Gods. The crowd was discussing it enthusiastically and wondering who Nell was. No one had heard of her before. The seventh-rank goddess Nell herself was nearby, but a little to the side. She kept her eyes on the announcement and knew that she owed her victory to a player whose name seemed to be Jake. The girl remembered how it all started, how her game failed because she had hurriedly prepared for the competition, which made the controls awkward, how she had almost no divine power due to the high difficulty of the levels, and the accumulation of power is facilitated by buying premium items. No one bought them from Nell. Back then, the 10th rank goddess Nell was in despair, but suddenly, someone bought up almost all the buns in the game. It turned out to be Jake, who was a free player in the game. He had purchased over 1,000 limited items. Nell was shocked, but at the same time she gained hope for participation in the competition, which she later won. Then she started gathering information about Jake. I found out that he is single, comes from a poor family, and both of his parents are deceased. His source of income is virtual currency, which is constantly increasing in value. Nell was grateful to this boy, whom she considered her talisman. She decided to give him special rewards and make him the strongest. Jake came to his senses with the sunlight blinding his eyes. He stood up with an effort, sat up unsteadily, tucking his legs under him. His head ached. But that wasn't what was bothering him. He remembered being in his room. Now the boy was in the forest. In the distance, among the trees, the remains of a half-ruined temple could be seen. The sudden thought that this was the radiation forest pierced my mind. And immediately, out of nowhere, like a ghostly hologram, a status window appeared in front of him. The notification, blinking blue, confirmed this guess. Then the system reported that the synchronization was successful and the second privilege was obtained. Jake couldn't believe what he was seeing. Was this really a status window from the game? But where does it come from in reality? I tried to punch him. My hand stung with pain, and a message appeared in the window that he had received the trait of cool-headedness. So this was not a dream. And he finally realized that this was the privilege he had been awarded. Jake tried as hard as he could to comprehend the fact that the game had become reality, but it seemed crazy to him. The system again notified him of the basic settings: hero name, special traits, skills, title, abilities, etc. The score in the game was 0. Jake stared at the screen in amazement. He was particularly struck by the player's title, Legendary Item Collector. He knew that in the game, the title was awarded to the person who collected all the items. So, did this mean that he now had the most expanded inventory? Unbelievable. Jake decided to check it out. Indeed, thanks to the donations, he gained access to every possible type of weapon. True, one of the swords was still blocked, but the boy wasn't surprised by this, as it had been like that earlier in the game. Jake tried to make sense of it all. There were 2 possibilities. Either he himself had miraculously found himself inside the game, or the game had just as miraculously become reality. The level and titles he had previously obtained there were reset, but access to the inventory remained. I remembered the admin's words. She promised to help me survive. Another notification suggested choosing a difficulty level before starting the training. The game also once allowed for level selection during the training period. Jake thought about it. He already knew that the most difficult stage was Wolf's Lair. Due to the difficulty of the level, there were limited controls there, and even my friend's skills didn't help. However, on the other hand, the higher the difficulty level, the better the rewards. And at the Hell level, the prizes are absolutely amazing. But you can only go through training in the forest once, and considering that this is not a game at all now and life does not resume, yes, the risk is considerable. But did Jake have a choice? The guy started setting things up. He decided to choose the inventory first. It was a pleasant surprise that even at the entry level, there were many items available. He realized he had a superset for a beginner, and it was exactly what he needed to overcome the hellish level. Jake thought he could do it on the account that it already completed this level in the game. The system offered to choose a weapon. There were a bow, a sword, a mace, an axe, and a spear. The choice isn't very wide, so the guy thought it would be better to give up altogether so as not to accumulate unnecessary things. A message has appeared about the increase in the reward for the Hell level. Jake decided that this was only for the best and boldly set off on his adventure. The Wolf's Domain training area was almost entirely a dark, ominous forest. Jake raced through it at top speed, his feet seemingly touching the ground. But despite his speed, the wolves eventually appeared behind him and pursued him, closing in relentlessly. After a while, they were matched up with him. The guy understood that although the fight was a training one, he would have to die for real. He soberly assessed the enemy as a strong opponent, knowing that wolves alone did not pose a significant threat, but their strength was in the pack. Together they could surround and bite. Jake decided to take the fight, but one by one. He turned sharply and stood expectantly facing the danger. The wolves rushed towards us, their mouths gaping fiercely, saliva flying everywhere. The boy engaged in battle with the two creatures that ran up first. He swung his sword so fiercely that the trees bowed and frightened birds flew in all directions. Soon all the wolves were lying dead. Jake happily concluded that he had not made a mistake with his choice of weapon. His strategy had been correct. The sword turned out to be convenient and powerful. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, another wolf flew in. Jake jumped in surprise, but his reflexes worked flawlessly. One wave of the hand and the enemy flew away into the thicket. The guy looked at his hand in the newbie's super glove and was surprised that there wasn't even any pain in his hand, even though the wolf was quite large. The discovery was very comforting, because it meant that there was nothing to be afraid of wolves. The last wolf, emerging from the bushes, was preparing to attack again. Jake swung his sword lightly. In an instant, blood spread across the lawn. The skinned monster fell as if cut down. Looking at the frozen wolf, our hero tried to listen to himself. He shed blood, but at the same time he felt icy calm. Is he crazy? Is this a manifestation of the effect of the ability he received? There was no clear answer. Taking a breath, Jake decided to get as far away from here as possible. He knew that he couldn't stay in the first zone for long, so he headed further through the thickets of the predatory forest. The forest turned out to be not quite the same as in the game. He had to wander around a bit. Eventually, after a while, he reached the next location. Zone 2 looked like a cemetery. There was a message that a golden key was hidden there that needed to be found. Jake was a shot sparrow and realized that not everything was that simple because this was a hellish level. One key would not do here. The whole of Zone 2 was teeming with undead. To neutralize them, you had to smash their heads, otherwise they would increase their level. And somewhere and already in the cemetery, this evil spirit had had enough. We need to find the key. And quickly, because the undead are about to appear. And if the player is surrounded by evil spirits, the battle will eventually exhaust him, and it will end badly. He quickly thought of a strategy. He needed to not swing his sword too much and conserve his strength, because these walking dead, although slower than wolves, are not as slow as zombies, but they never get tired. Jake started a game of catch-up. The enhanced effects of his equipment gave him an advantage in agility, so there was no point in wasting time and destroying everyone in a row. It is enough just to remove those who are in the way. That's how Jake got to the grave where he had found the key earlier in the game. If he was lucky, the key should be right here. The super sword shattered the tombstone into pieces. A bright light illuminated the surrounding darkness. That was the key. The system immediately notified me that the key had been successfully found and that I needed to go back into the forest. While Jake was wondering what was going to happen next, dead, bony hands grabbed his backside and one of the monsters sank its teeth into his shoulder. It wasn't so much painful and scary as disgusting. The guy swung his super sword, and the abomination that was closer flew apart, while the rest retreated in horror to a safe distance. Jake threw the key he had found into his inventory so he wouldn't lose it. He prepared for the slaughter. The undead climbed up the wall towards him. Of course, he could have quickly moved from this area to the next, but he decided to engage in a duel. It was a great opportunity to earn points, especially since the opponents were not serious and there was no time limit in Zone 2. Jake stopped only when there were no surviving enemies left. He breathed heavily. His reward was an additional bonus for completely cleaning the second floor. The guy was quite satisfied with the result. It was time to move on to the next zone. But he could barely stand, so he decided to rest a bit first. He analyzed the passage of Zone 2 and decided that the strategy was correct, but exhausting. I checked my stats. Only my strength and agility were high, but my health wasn't. So a rest was definitely not superfluous, especially before the fight with the boss. When darkness enveloped everything around, illuminated by the cold glow of the full moon, Jake stood up and moved on. When he reached the training teleportation stone, the boy looked around. Theoretically, the boss should have spawned somewhere nearby. Suddenly, the ground trembled, rippled, and exploded, scattering lumps of earth and pieces of stone all around. Jake was thrown back by the blast wave. And ahead, from the abyss in a translucent haze of fog, a huge, ominous figure of a beast rose. It was a giant werewolf with a predatory mouth full of sharp, shiny teeth. Jake realized it was a level 55 werewolf. But his fur was gray, not silver. So he was a nameless monster. The werewolf growled menacingly, his eyes burning with blood-red lanterns. He prepared to attack. However, the boy was not nervous. He had good weapons and hoped that the monster would use the same tactics in battle as in the game. The werewolf rushed forward with lightning speed. Jake fought back with dignity, but the speed of his opponent unpleasantly surprised him. Another attack spun them both around so that all that was visible was a mad whirlwind, from which a leg and a tail would occasionally emerge. The monster's attacks were repeated, and Jake was confirmed in his guess that everything was going the same as in the game. It was necessary to keep the defense, and he repelled the werewolf's attacks again and again. The monster had high attack power, but the guy's defense power was much higher, and he was hoping for a window of opportunity. During one of the endless attacks, a crunching sound was heard. It was Jake breaking his opponent's claws. But that wasn't enough, because the most dangerous attack was the mouth, and the boy came up with a plan. When the werewolf came at him again, Jake stuck his hand in his mouth. He had no fighting skills, but he had super equipment, and it worked. Jake's advantage in defense points triggered a mechanic that nullified the opponent's attack. Attack multiplied by 0 also results in 0 health, and all this made the formidable werewolf no more dangerous than a puppy. Jake received a notification that he had cleared the hellish difficulty training mode and needed to go through a portal to complete it. Nearby, the portal passage shimmered, and Jake realized with relief that there would be no more respawns. He sat with his back against a tree, not having the strength to get up. He thought that his rookie outfit had come in handy, that he had squeezed everything he could out of it, and that he was sorry to part with it. But a new stage with considerable profit awaited us ahead, and we had to move on. Jake was about to step into the portal when he suddenly remembered the key. He turned around abruptly on the spot and ran back as fast as he could, scolding himself for his haste and forgetfulness. After some time, the boy ran to the ruins of an ancient temple. There he went down into the dungeon where, as he knew, there was treasure. The chest was in place. Jake was glad he remembered her in time and sat down, admiring the golden glow. Then he carefully opened it with the key and, bending down, froze in anticipation of something incredible. At the bottom of the chest, a rather large pearl gleamed with a golden glow. The system announced that it was Long Liver Songdan. Jake's eyes lit up with delight. Sondan gave an additional property. The characteristic was chosen randomly. He knew perfectly well that this was a rare find, not so easy to get hold of, even for such experienced people as himself. In short, the treasure was cool. Jake had used such things before, and he was going to do the same now. He was about to bring it to his mouth, wondering what it tasted like, but something stopped him. He thought it was not the right time. He decided to use Sondane after equipping the item. This increased the chances of getting something really useful. And a little later, Jake remembered that due to level restrictions he couldn't take Sondan with him, so he added the pearl to his inventory. Suddenly another idea popped into his head. Jake set about opening everything in the dungeon. I even looked into all the old potsherds and amphorae just in case. But there was nothing else there. He slowly walked towards the exit, regretting that he had not found anything interesting except the Sondan pearl, and at the same time rejoicing that he now possessed such a rare thing. As he left the temple, the bright sun blinded him. Yes, last night seemed long and hard, but in the light of day even the fatigue receded. This gave him strength, and Jake, in a wonderful mood, headed for the portal, reminding himself on the way to check the rewards for completing the training. He decided he didn't understand why the game had become a reality, but it didn't bother him now. The only thing he could do now was take a step forward, and he did, plunging into the magical blue light of the portal. The training is over. It's time to start the game. The tall tower stretched endlessly upwards, and its top was far beyond sight. Nearby, the portal's eye blinked, and Jake was literally spat out. The transition caused the boy to have a bout of nausea, but it quickly passed. As he climbed up, Jake looked around and realized he was in the Infinity Tower. He had seen it many times in the game, but it made him wary. Because logically, he should have ended up in the newcomers' village, not here. Usually, after the training period, the newcomers were sent to the town of Latines. Why isn't Jake there then, but near the tower? Has the game settings changed? The rookie's kit was also missing. The guy was standing barefoot, wearing only a tracksuit and no equipment. As if in response to his thoughts, a status window with information appeared in front of his face. It was reported that player Jake has 90 points per game, a significant increase in abilities, and, oh my God, level 31! Jake was shocked. How is that possible? He had just finished training. Where did he get such experience? The guy checked the awards. There were quite a few of them, so I had to sit down to look at them all carefully. He was interrupted by another message. It said that Jake had been granted access to secondary education. He had never heard of such a thing, but he assumed that it could also be one of the bonuses for completing the hellish level. And if that's the case, that's incredibly cool. It was an exclusive privilege. Jake broke into a smile. Continuing to smile, the boy returned to reviewing his achievements. I noticed the title that increased experience. That was good. That increased all the characteristics. Then, noticing something, Jake reached deep into the hologram of the screen and pulled out the legendary chest. Wow, this is a treasure! This item was extremely rare because it allowed you to obtain a legendary item. Jake suddenly remembered how his friends thought he was crazy for putting $5 million into the game. It turned out it was worth it. But if you open the chest now and get the legendary item, Jake still wouldn't be able to equip it due to the level limit. And putting it away wasn't an option because the inventory was packed to the brim with legendary gear. You don't want to waste anything, right? And with that thought, Jake resolutely opened the box. A transparent ticket fell into his palm, a rainbow sticker. If you added it to a certain item, the level requirements were reduced by 100. Jake decided to use it now. Of course, the smartest thing would be to invest in armor, but the thought of a cool weapon was so tempting. At level 30, with a rainbow sticker, he could take a level 130 weapon. Perfect! Almost immediately, Jake found what he needed, and with the belief that the best defense is offense, Jake chose the level 130 sword of Koisham. He had already met this sword once and knew all its characteristics perfectly. The novice's super sword was also legendary, but it couldn't compare to the sword of Koisham. However, it was necessary to urgently raise our level, for the sake of our own safety. Because if the world Jake finds himself in is truly War of the Gods, then a low-level newcomer won't be able to last long there. It was a world where almost no one was left, and the complexity was off the charts. Yes, indeed, this world was the War of the Gods. Infinity Tower Town for players below level 100. Then, in the middle of the dark alley, a portal flashed. Jake appeared from there. He looked around, noting the desertedness of the residential area. However, somewhere nearby, the echo of conversations could be heard. So the boy headed towards the sounds of voices. After walking a few meters, he stepped onto the street where the other players were. Something was wrong. Something was bothering Jake. After observing the people for a while, he realized the players here had just finished training, but they already had pretty decent equipment. Where did they come from? And their level itself was negligible. Of course, it took Jake some time to complete the training and the hell level, but it was only a couple of days. What did he manage to miss? Just then, he heard a conversation between two players passing by. They were discussing that dozens of people had died in the B-rank dungeon. It was as if the only survivors were the members of the guild that organized the raid and their comrades. Jake listened, and the boys continued to chatter. They assumed that the survivors were traitors. They fled, abandoning the team to their fate, and then lied to everyone. But who would question them? The guild members are the most powerful here. For 3 days, Jake enjoyed the peace and wonderful weather, but at the same time he actively accumulated information. He learned that a great migration had begun 5 years ago. This is a phenomenon where Earthlings who initiated their gaming abilities migrated to the Infinity Tower, and this phenomenon is permanent. Jake couldn't understand why everyone had been summoned here and not to the town like before. Why had the world converged on the Infinity Tower? And if so, why was Jake called in only now, 5 years later? Suddenly, the boy's peace was blown away like a gust of wind. A wave of anger swept over him. He felt like a loser because he was 5 years behind the rest. But Jake didn't like to be sad for long, so he quickly switched to positive thinking. He had a cool inventory that could compensate for everything. So the guy decided that first he needed to raise his level, then learn about studying, and only then to reach level 50, which will give you the opportunity to use various gadgets that will make you stronger. Another fact bothered Jake. Previously, he had never seen anyone in the game except his squad. And then it turned out that there were many more players. The world had changed, and it was unusual. Jake thought that there was no way he would fit in here now if he hadn't been constantly stuck in the game before. Behind these thoughts, the guy didn't notice how he approached a neat little house with a sign saying, "Hotel." He went in and ordered something to eat. His brain was working non-stop. Jake noticed that the names of the skills and dungeons hadn't changed. That was good. But the prices have changed. That's not bad either. He managed to sell an item he didn't need for as much as 50,000 points. The item was of heroic rank, but not very valuable to the boy. Anyone could have purchased it, although there were rumors that it had become rare, almost antique. Slowly chewing his steak, the boy thought that to get cool items he had to go into dangerous dungeons. After fortifying himself and purchasing a low-rank potion, Jake decided to begin. The best option turned out to be to challenge the Infinity Tower. Jake knew that the players were drawn to the tower for a variety of reasons. Some wanted a better life. Some wanted better housing. And then there was the demon invasion. If no one manages to break through to the top floor of the tower within 15 years, a demon invasion will begin. He will completely destroy everything. So, the boy resolutely walked towards the tower. The first-floor dungeon greeted the boy with an eerie semi-darkness, and also the echoing sounds of other people's footsteps and growls. Jake realized that the giant rats were already out hunting. There were many of them, but Jake's sword did its job perfectly. Soon all the rats were neatly chopped up. To go to the next floor, you have to go through a test of battle with monsters. Here, the guy seems to have coped. He wondered how many floors the tower had now. It used to be 50. Maybe it's more now. Then a huge rat grabbed his elbow. Jake was momentarily confused. The attacks from the monsters on the first floor were dangerous because the guy's equipment was low level. The best of the worst, whatever he had the money for. While the thoughts were racing, Jake's hands and feet quickly dealt with the rat. However, the adventure made me think. In the future, we must be very careful. Besides, rats were famous for their stubbornness. Moving forward, Jake saw hundreds of red lights in the distance. They were the eyes of rats. The message issued a warning about the appearance of a giant angry rat. Too much ugliness for the first level, but there's only one way out: to fight. The rats flew in, furiously and fearlessly, from all directions at once. It seemed as if there was no end to them, but Jake was as agile as them. He wriggled like a snake, and later almost all the rats were destroyed. Those who remained cowered in fear against the walls and raised their paws upwards. At the same time, the boy's level increased. He muttered to himself with satisfaction that fighting with a good weapon was a real pleasure. Moving on, Jake looked back and managed to notice the tails of the unkilled rats, which were running away as fast as they could. The guy froze in surprise. They hadn't done that before in the game. It was too realistic. But then Jake reached the end of the first floor. Unknown deciduous trees towered on the second floor, and there were also scary reptiles that looked like dinosaurs. One of them stepped in Jake's direction, but with a swing of his sword, Jake split him in half. He himself was surprised by the easy victory, and he was convinced that the sword of Koishem was truly Imbo's. This sword is a real godsend for surprise attacks, as it increases your agility. But the best thing about it is... Jake's thoughts were rudely interrupted by an attack from another angry dinosaur. Jake managed to figure out that the best thing about the sword was its huge bonus to attack power, and he never thought about it again. Dinosaurs appeared one after another, angry, huge, with stone clubs. They took the boy into a ring and pushed him so hard that Jake barely had time to fight back. The rainbow sticker came in handy. In the fight, Jake noted that the main challenge on this floor was to defeat the reptilians. It was a good thing that their attack power was inferior to the sword of Koyam. Worse, Jake's defenses were weak, but good armor for beginners at the beginning of the game was generally rare. Players usually started half-equipped. Realizing that the dinosaurs did not pose a major threat to him, the boy decided not to leave the level until he had completely cleared it. On the third floor, the sky was bright like summer, and everything was covered in greenery. Jake entered the thicket of trees and bushes, but before starting the third floor test, he decided to do something. He knew there were hidden underground caves with rewards here. He was a few years late to the game anyway. So why not waste a little more time cleaning out caves like these, just so someone else doesn't beat him to it? Jake remembered how he first came across such a dungeon about 4 years ago. It was his first time playing the Game of the Gods. He was a yellow-faced noob and asked to join the opposing team. They warned me that the game was very difficult, but they allowed me to go with them, but not to lag behind. Jake thought he was lucky to have met such a cool, friendly girl, but he was terribly wrong. Jake didn't even immediately understand what had happened. At first he received a message that he had been kicked off the team. Only then did I notice the sword sticking out of his chest. Still not believing how this could happen, Jake heard the mocking voice of one of the team members. He laughed at Jake's stupidity and naivety, which had pushed the boy into their arms. They wanted to rob Jake, even though everything he had was just cheap junk to those bastards. Jake now understood that they simply enjoyed making fun of the weak. Then he rushed to run away from the robbers. While searching for a place to hide, he accidentally came across the entrance to a cave that was entwined with vines that made him invisible. The guy considered it luck. After all, it was this negative experience that had made him start investing money in the game. He even laughed because, after all, he should be grateful to those idiots. As he emerged into a small, long clearing, Jake remembered that the cave must be somewhere nearby. Everything was the same as it was then. There was only no entrance. Maybe it doesn't really exist anymore. The gaming world has changed a lot over the past 5 years. And if someone found the dungeon and cleared it out, then the entrance could really have disappeared. Disappointed, Jake slowly backed away. Suddenly, one leg lost its firm support and hung in the air. Immediately after her, the boy fell into the abyss. While he was flying, he couldn't understand where this pit trap came from, if there weren't people living nearby. The landing was not very soft, because the bottom of the pit was covered with a stone floor. But all the troubles were immediately forgotten as soon as Jake realized where he had ended up. The system announced that this was the secret dungeon of the High Alchemist's laboratory. Unbelievable. Who would have thought that such a place could be hidden here? When the emotions subsided a bit, Jake drank the potion to heal himself. because if he had a little less health, a fall from such a height could have been fatal. And then he began to think. He had seen many underground laboratories of various magicians before, but he had never come across an alchemical one. What was interesting was that the grass and branches blocking the passage were just a magical illusion. So someone has already been here, but if the dungeon hasn't disappeared, it means it hasn't been completely cleared. At this level, Jake couldn't use all his equipment, but a small illumination stone was enough for him. This stone only illuminated the space around the player, but that was exactly what was needed at the moment. In the rays of light, Jake noticed a descent into the dungeon. He understood that he could find his death there, but he didn't want to waste the chance. So I left, hoping only not to run into other players, because if they had valuable loot, blood would certainly be shed. A surprise awaited him behind the door to the dungeon. A whole bunch of different monsters. Jake picked up his pace because he was unlikely to be able to overcome such a number. And a sarcastic thought crossed my mind that it was rather rude to place monsters right at the entrance. What options? Not many. You can only use the points that he has managed to accumulate. While running, the guy opened the status window, selected a speed boost, and maximized his agility. The effect was amazing. Jake was propelled forward, the monsters left far behind, but a dead end loomed ahead. Jake tried to slow down, but it wasn't that easy. At breakneck speed, he rushed towards the wall, ran vertically upwards along it by inertia, flipped over in the air several times, and only then stopped. Nervously wiping the sweat from his face, Jake thought that he hadn't expected this. He just wanted to get around the monsters, and instead he got a crazy skill that almost got out of control. After taking a breather, the boy decided to test his other abilities. He started with the sword. A few movements turned into a mad whirlwind. It was hard to believe that abilities could change so quickly. The sword cut through the air with a whistling sound, and it was impossible to trace its trajectory. Growling from deep within the tunnel made the boy stop his exercises and turn around. One of the monsters was still catching up with him. Jake decided he had practiced enough and had time to get used to the speed. A chimera emerged from the darkness. This monster was created by magically combining several creatures, a kind of Frankenstein's monster. It wasn't undead, it was completely alive, so Jake decided that with such a monster it was better not to delay and rushed into battle. The monster screamed wildly, individual parts flew off it. One arm, then another, then just pieces. Jake was thrilled. Yes, his defense was weak, but his main advantage was his speed. This allowed him to avoid blows. Pushing off the floor sharply, Jake flew high up towards the armless monster, hoping to finish him off. But he flew to the opposite wall, knocking over part of the stonework with his back. He landed on his fist. The chimera was dangerous. It used the strength and abilities of all the creatures it was made from. Right before Jake's eyes, a giant tentacled arm instantly extended from the top of the chimera's head. This tentacle grew and lengthened towards the boy. Jake barely had time to duck and jump away. Enraged, he rushed into the duel, deciding that he would not run away. Either master or perish. The scythe was strong. The sword could not hit him. What to do? Of course, there are elite monsters in secret dungeons. They are strong, so you have to fight them alone. What if this monster isn't alone here? We need to finish him off quickly before others appear. And Jake rushed at the monster with increased zeal, thinking casually that it would be better if alchemists were creating medicines, not these creatures. Suddenly, the idea to try a clever technique struck me. Without thinking, he jumped up, leaving his illusory image in the same place below. And it worked. The monster focused on the mental double, and the boy chopped off the tentacle with a devastating blow. The fist fell to the floor, clenched. The monster was slapping it in horror, and Jake chuckled maliciously. Now this armless chimera was left without any means of attack. What is this? A giant hand appeared in place of the previously severed left hand. Jake blinked in shock, and the next moment he desperately threw himself at her. The chimera slapped the floor where the boy was, the way one would smite annoying insects. She laughed out loud. Then she raised her hand, expecting to see a crushed Jake, and stared questioningly at the empty space. The guy was flying from above at that moment. Then, only his illusory double was below. The chimera stamped its feet furiously, realizing that it had been tricked. The real Jake, lowering himself with his sword down, cut the monster from the top to the bottom. For a moment the thought occurred to me that the monster would still be alive, but phew! The system threw out notifications one after another that he had destroyed a special level 100 chimera, raised his level to 50, and now had access to his accessories. Jake sighed in relief. Yes, the experience points in the monster dungeon are no joke. He immediately went up 2 levels and even reached level 50 in just 3 days after training. Inspired by his success, Jake began to look at his accessories. There weren't many for low levels. What should he choose? A premium ring that increases skill power by 10%? Or maybe take Gregory's bracelet and necklace, which will significantly increase defense and slightly increase strength and agility. Suddenly, a small monster, somewhat resembling a dog, ran up to Jake. It stuck out its tongue, wagged its red tail briskly, and at first glance seemed very cute. Jake jumped in surprise, but quickly came to his senses and shouted that he had just received new equipment and was going to tear everyone apart. The dog monster opened its toothy mouth, roared menacingly, and began to stick out its tongue. But it was immediately destroyed. Jake realized that it was finally over. The chimeras had taken up a lot of his time and energy. He needed to get treatment. Then the boy remembered the suspicious wall he had rammed with his own back. I decided to check and saw an unconscious girl there. Her legs and arms were tied. Is this a hidden quest from an NPC? If it wasn't an NPC, it could be the player who first found this dungeon. Jake leaned over the girl, wondering how she had ended up locked here. He didn't understand anything, but he couldn't leave her. In the end, I decided to look for some kind of item for such an occasion. The heroic rank status scroll seemed to be a good fit for him. It could be used to check the status of an object at a short distance. It was an expensive thing with great functionality. You can't buy it now because premium stores have disappeared, but the guy had a good stock. To check, Jake crouched down next to the stranger and unrolled the scroll. I immediately received information that the player's name is Stacy. Level 37, has dungeon exploration skills and a number of other characteristics related to strength, endurance, and magic. Besides, she was his compatriot. It turned out that she wasn't an NPC, but a player after all. Jake's attention was caught by a line about S rank in dungeon exploration. Previously, he had only seen the highest rank as E level, and he had never heard of dungeon exploration at all. Overall, it's cool. If E rank is pretty cool, then searching for S rank dungeons is probably a gamble, right? You can find dungeons with cool loot and live in chocolate. On the other hand, the girl had absolutely no combat skills or characteristics, and that's dangerous. Suddenly, the stranger made an incomprehensible sound as she came to. Then she slowly opened her eyes. Jake spoke gently to her. The girl jumped up in horror. Panic-filled fear froze in her eyes. Jake motioned for her to be quiet so she wouldn't invite monsters. The stranger was trembling, bursting into tears, constantly apologizing and begging not to touch her. The guy explained in an even tone that he didn't intend to hurt her, that he had simply accidentally bumped into her and didn't understand what she was apologizing for. Suddenly the girl was surprised. How could he have passed by if she was walled up behind a stone wall? Jake didn't want to go into details. She asked him to untie her, but Jake signaled her to be quiet as he tapped on the nearest wall. There was nothing there. When the girl asked what she was looking for, he explained that there were hidden parts in such secret places. Maybe she had already found them? But she denied that it was not part of the dungeon at all, but a space created by the person who kept her here. The girl said that the wall appeared with a wave of his magic wand. Jake immediately thought it was the spirit of the earth. But why had he locked the poor thing up here? The stranger sighed sadly and suggested that he simply wanted to take all the awards for himself. She also said that there were 3 of them. Finally, the pieces in Jake's head began to come together. Most likely the girl was an S-rank scout, but with low combat performance. She could survive by trading location and information. Somehow it was set on fire by mean players. It is quite likely because there are no laws in the tower. Force rules here, and people can be mean. The girl added that since she was still alive, They probably plan to use her for intelligence purposes or sell her. Jake thought about it. He himself had caught sight of her incredible abilities. What if fate itself had brought them together? And the guy decided that it was easier to survive in a team. He looked the stranger in the eye and promised to help. Jake smiled charmingly as he did so. She looked at him in disbelief. Jake sincerely assured her of his support. Could his eyes be lying? The girl was forced to confide because she felt that the opposite decision would only add to her problems. Jake finally let her go. She thanked him, and the guy said he knew how to pay back the debt. The stranger assured him that she would definitely help him because she had unique abilities. At the same time, she was surprised to realize that he knew exactly what they were. Jake assured her that she shouldn't worry. He was just helping her because they were fellow countrymen. By the way, it would be good if the girl could pinpoint the location of the dungeon. And it was also interesting how she ended up here in the first place. The girl replied that her name was Stacy. She made a living as an intelligence officer because information about the dungeons is expensive. She was caught in the act of cheating. These bastards were following her because of her abilities. Then the girl pointed to the wall and explained that there was a way through there. Jake, swinging his sword vigorously, smashed the wall and indeed saw a passage through the breach. Then he asked Stacy where the three of them had gone. She had heard that they were supposed to return to explore and take over the dungeons. So the chimeras at the entrance were most likely their work. How could they get past them and go back? Stacy knew for sure that the chimeras here froze at exactly midnight and remained motionless for several hours. Such news cheered Jake up. He didn't remember anything like that in the game. But then, the dungeon here is special. Stacy also heard that those guys had gone away for a few days, although she didn't realize how much time had passed because she was in the dark the whole time. Jake decided to clear the dungeon for now and ordered the girl to show him the way. I myself decided to give her a couple of items of her level, but to be careful with her. Suddenly, a powerful beam of light flashed ahead. A hand tried to grab Stacy by the hair. She lurched back and forth. Jake barely had time to catch her. 3 men were moving towards them. They were talking, glad that they had returned in time to prevent their prey from escaping. Stacy peered at her tormentors from behind Jake's back in horror. Jake wondered how difficult it would be to fight all 3 at once. The cool-headedness skill was activated. The boy was enveloped in calm. One of the scoundrels suggested that Jake hand over his equipment and get out of there. He still couldn't beat the 3 of them. Jake analyzed that the opponent's equipment was weak. It was quite possible to defeat them. It was just that in a fight with people, the sword required special handling. Another dude offered to kill Jake and got a buff to boost his speed. Stacy squealed in fear that she would fight too, but Jake firmly refused and ordered her to hide and not interfere. The bandit moved forward with increased speed, hissing bloodthirsty. He threatened to cut Jake into pieces. Somewhere behind him, Stacy was shouting that she believed in Jake's victory, but the boy was completely focused on his opponent. He activated the sprint skill and raced, swinging a giant cleaver. Jake still had time to think that he couldn't hesitate, because he would die like a dog, and he made a sharp lunge with his sword towards the enemy. As soon as weapons crossed, the rivals instantly assessed each other. The bandit quickly realized that this cactus was too strong. He clearly hadn't counted on it. Jake was satisfied with his assumptions about the level of the enemies and decided not to drag out the battle. He increased his pressure a little, and his sword, like a knife in butter, smoothly plunged into the huge cleaver, simultaneously taking off the head. In a moment, the opponent was already dead, but he was still clutching the pitiful stump of a cleaver in his hands. Stacy let out a cry of surprise and delight. The other 2 robbers' arrogant expressions instantly disappeared from their faces and were replaced by those of a dazed man. They only managed to widen their eyes and open their mouths. Jake, leaving the corpse behind, walked in their direction. The bandits were scared. They received a system message that their partner Sam was really dead. The one with the glasses and the staff screamed furiously for his comrade to attack quickly if he didn't want to die. Jake watched calmly, his face frozen. And suddenly I realized that I couldn't move. One of his feet had sunk into the floor. It was a chain spell, instant magic with no time limit. The second bandit, recovering from the shock, grabbed his bow and fired an arrow at Jake. The boy was limited in movement, but his other reactions were normal. Therefore, he easily intercepted the arrow in flight. Then arrows rained down in a hail, and he intercepted them all. The archer fired a triple volley. Time seemed to slow down for Jake. He realized he could see each arrow clearly. The next moment he intercepted all three with lightning speed. The bandit archer couldn't believe his eyes. His friend grabbed his magic staff and ordered him to wait for time so he could cast a spell. Then the archer decided to use the expensive arrows that he treasured like the apple of his eye. Jake watched, not understanding what was happening. Magic or something else? Incomprehensible reflections, densely shrouded in smoke, flew at him from the blinding flash. Stacy cowered in fear and screamed shrilly. While the smoke cleared, the archer tried to see the enemy's corpse. He laughed sarcastically. It was revenge for Sam's death. It was a bit of a pity about the storm strike, but the enemy's equipment sold should compensate for that. The archer looked somewhat condescendingly at his mage partner and mockingly advised him to use his staff as a club next time so as not to fumble with spells for too long. Stacy at this time looked out from her hiding place with fear. There was still smoke around when the bandit mage noticed something, as if the outlines of a figure were indistinct. But the dust around the outline quickly settled, and eventually it became clear that it was Jake. He cleared his throat. The storm had not harmed him. The archer twisted with rage. How could he have known that Jake had been preparing for such a blow and had time to react in time? Stacy, on the contrary, clapped her hands, because in her mind she had already managed to bury the guy. Jake decided that the fight had gone on too long and it was time to end it. The archer somehow lost his self-confidence and screamed in horror for the mage to come up with some trick. But suddenly he realized that the magician was not around. Using magic, he fenced himself off with a wall and left his partner to his fate. Jake wanted to neutralize Archer first. He cried out for help, but it was all over for him quickly. At the same time, the mage ran as far away from the scene of the fight as possible, mentally praising himself for the decision he had made. Immediately after Sam's death, it became clear to him how everything would end. One thing is unclear. Why is a monster like Jake still only on the 3rd floor? It might be worth reporting him to the guild. And with this decision, the mage picked up speed, but he didn't get far. Something hit him in the head. He fell, dropping his glasses, but quickly got up, realizing that it was Jake who had caught up with him. This guy probably doesn't have any stats. He probably has some cool gear, so you shouldn't go head-to-head with him. Therefore, the magician put his hands out in front of him in a conciliatory manner and offered to come to a peaceful agreement. Jake thought he couldn't afford to take the risk, and asked aloud why he was wasting his time. The magician whispered that he belonged to the Golden Lion Guild and could help them join. And killing the magician was risky, because the guild would seek revenge. Jake agreed that he was right. At the same time, he took a step forward, clinking the mage's glasses, and then he asked if the guild knew who he was. The magician didn't understand what he was talking about. Jake explained that there were no witnesses in the dungeon at the moment. His eyes flashed ominously. A shiver ran down the magus's back. So a fight was inevitable? He decided to play a trick. He gritted his teeth, expecting another guild member to arrive. And then the magus waved his hand sharply, as if greeting someone behind Jake's back. Jake unconsciously turned around. At that very moment, the magician rushed at the boy with the dagger. At the same time, he used the skill Stone Hammer, and heavy blocks fell from the ceiling. In vain. Jake didn't even get scratched. The mage frantically tried to figure it out. Apparently it was all about defense, because he noticed a ring on Jake, which is typical for classes with low health. I tried to use the stone barrier skill, blocking myself with piles of stones, and again, in vain. Jake's sword easily dealt with both the barrier and the mage himself. Jake felt no joy in his victory. His soul was saddened by the realization that he had killed 3 people. Corpses were lying in the dungeon. Stacy looked from one to the other in disbelief. Unbelievable. He alone got rid of 3. And these weren't just any players, they were real thugs. And why was Jake so unmoved? And his equipment? But he took down both the head and the cleaver with one blow like they were toys. Why is he still on the lower floors with such a level? Jake returned just as Stacy, in her thoughts, had come to the conclusion that she was damn lucky. She was about to die when a miracle happened. He appeared. The girl rushed towards Jake, admiring his agility and heroism, but Jake waved her away and began collecting trophies. He also told her to take a weapon. Jake thought there might be other players with this gang. Stacy denied it, saying there were only 3 of them, but they could have asked the guild for help. The boy disagreed. If they wanted to keep the secret dungeon to themselves, why would they tell anyone else about it? Stacy thought about it and admitted that he was right. Jake handed the girl the magician's magic staff. She refused, but he thought that this equipment could be useful in finding new locations, especially if you join forces. Stacy waved her arms even more vigorously, refusing to accept the staff. She was already in debt for the rescue. Jake said she could help find new dungeons. Her unique features would come in handy. The girl stared at Jake for a moment, then decided to help him, because he seemed like a good person. She accepted the staff. Then she pointed to a gap in the wall and explained that in that direction you could reach the boss. But there were chimeras there. Jake replied that chimeras were not a problem. On the way, he marveled at the girl's talent. She thought about how pathetic she had looked up until now. So she decided to behave with dignity from now on. At the large arched door leading to the boss, Jake asked if she knew which boss was there. Stacy didn't know. She didn't have the skills. The prospect of meeting the boss along the way didn't scare Jake, so he quickly opened the door. A long, wide corridor was lit around the perimeter by torches. A system notification provided information that the Death Knight, the ancient alchemist Paranet, had awakened from his slumber. Death Knight? That doesn't sound very promising, especially since Death Knights are only available above level 200. So wrong. At the far end of the corridor was a magnificent tall throne. A skeleton in a golden cape and hood sat comfortably on it. With a broad smile, he happily announced that he had not seen humans for a long time. Yes, it was the Death Knight Paranet, level 68. That's what the system reported. Jake exhaled noisily. Level 68 is still manageable. He's not exactly a Death Knight after all. Then the guy told Stacy to wait outside while he himself began analyzing the available information. A true Death Knight is one who lived a noble life and was resurrected from the dead by a high-level lich. But this boss was an alchemist in his lifetime, so he couldn't turn into a real knight after death. Meanwhile, Paranet had risen from his throne and was already standing, leaning on his sword. He clicked his bones, and in a loud, sepulchral voice asked how a mere mortal dared to approach him without due terror. Jake spat contemptuously. Look at how much pathos comes from an unfinished knight. The skeleton pointed his index finger at the boy, warning that there would be no turning back if he came even a centimeter closer. That's nonsense! Jake burst out laughing. The skeleton hissed angrily. No one had ever made fun of him before. The guy also got angry and moved decisively against the ugly boss. Jake struck the first powerful blow. The Paranet, with terrible screams and howls, darted into the air. Jake didn't like how he dodged such a perfectly aimed blow. I tried again. Everything happened again. How does this skeleton manage to dodge if it is significantly slower? Jake decided to swing his sword at random until he hit. The fight then turned into a frantic race. Jake ran after Paranet, waving his weapon wildly, but it was all in vain. The impudent skeleton ran, jumped, flew, dodged, rolled over, and laughed mockingly all the while. How is that? Maybe this Paranet has some kind of skill? And the skeleton was happy that Jake was already tired, and his weak waves were only enough to scare away mosquitoes. To him, the Death Knight, they really hit the nail on the head. And then the guy guessed that the boss was using a trap. Most likely his skill is somehow related to prediction. The opponents froze against each other. Jake was thinking about how to hit the skeleton in the head, and the skeleton was intercepting the thought of where exactly the boy was aiming. Jake understood that Paranet either had a heightened instinct for self-preservation or could sense danger. In the end, the skeleton couldn't stand it anymore. He ordered Jake not to provoke him because he knew all the boy's intentions, and he suggested that they get away, promising to give him his life. But Jake didn't need that. He shouted that he would still calculate the monster's skill and kill it, and he rushed forward again. The skeleton suddenly whined, warning the boy not to approach. Feigning fear, he confused the boy, and then suddenly threw glasses of potion at him. Jake had precisely cut through the enemy's advantage because he was ready to defend himself before the attack began. Then the potion thrown by the monster began to melt the floor. Its acrid stench gradually rose upward. The boy was forced to cover his nose. Paranet screamed that it was useless to dodge because his potions were very strong. It was enough to inhale even once, and that's it. You were a corpse. System notifications one after another reported that he had been affected by the effect and was intoxicated by Paranet poison, and that he had been assigned a special status. Jake could really feel his condition deteriorating. His legs gave out and he sank to the floor. The skeleton gloated, boasting about his secret weapon, which had helped to bring more than one enemy to the grave. Jake could see how quickly his health was decreasing. If he didn't do something now, it would soon be too late. He opened his inventory, found a novice potion left over from training. This potion removed any effect below level 100. Jake feverishly reached for the bottle and drank its contents in a couple of gulps. While he was drinking, Paranet continued to threaten that the antidote wouldn't work here because... And suddenly the skeleton froze in mid-sentence, seeing that Jake had returned to normal. This is impossible. How did this boy get rid of the poisoning? When the system beeped one last time, indicating that the effect was completely removed, Jake jumped to his feet. Paranet didn't have time to figure out where the boy had gone. It suddenly occurred to him that Jake might have calculated his weakness. But it was too late. The boy planted his skull on the sword so that the tip of the blade came right between the eye sockets. Jake simply realized at some point that the monster couldn't figure out the enemy's plans if it couldn't see him. The rest was a matter of technique. The skeleton let out a long, eerie howl, and then his skull magically exploded. The system came to life again, giving out information. Paranet was amazed. Level up. Dungeon cleared. Rare title of Secret Dungeon Fighter awarded. Paranet Essence obtained. Paranet Life Capacity obtained. If you move the entity into the container, it will summon the Death Knight Paranet. Jake didn't have time to read. His eyes were shining with excitement. What a pitiful loot for a boss. And the ability to summon a boss with increased survivability is a complete imba. Stacy burst into the throne room. She laughed and congratulated Jake on his victory. She also wondered how Jake was able to deal with the boss all by himself. The guy modestly noted that the boss wasn't that strong. An open portal could be seen nearby. Jake nodded in his direction and suggested that Stacy go outside and get some rest. She frowned. But then the guy asked to add her as a friend, and the girl immediately beamed, agreeing. She said that the character's name coincided with her real name. In Infinity Tower, the equivalent of mobile communication was Messenger. Stacy received Jake's contact. The guy wanted to keep in touch. And if the girl suddenly found a secret dungeon, she could quickly summon him. And that's where they parted ways. Jake had another problem to solve. He checked into the nearest hotel. There, on the bed of a rented room, he laid out his main achievements: a container of Paranet's life and a glass with his essence. Grunting, he suddenly wondered why the Death Knight needed a life tank. But then I seriously thought about what to do with this treasure. You could have summoned Paranet, or you could have put it up for auction. In the end, he chose the first option. Carefully, so as not to lose a single drop, Jake poured the essence into the container of life. A system notification issued a message that the entity was entered. For a moment, nothing happened, and then the poisonous blue mixture began to evaporate intensely, turning into a vortex that slowly brightened. In the center of the vortex, the outlines of Paranet were visible. The notification signaled that the unfinished Death Knight Paranet had become a growth-type servitor. Unexpected. You could still buy regular servitors, but you couldn't get one like this for money. Augmented servitors act as multiple team members at once. Meanwhile, Paranet had already materialized in his usual form of a skeleton, dressed in a cape with a hood pulled low. The skeleton's bare skull grinned in a friendly smile. Jake knew that this type of servitor could be summoned at any time, so it was a good idea to always carry one with him. However, he couldn't deny himself the pleasure of giving the monster a kick. The Paranet flew upside down and froze with its butt up against the opposite wall. Jake asked if he remembered anything about the events in the dungeon. The skeleton knew for sure that Jake had killed him, but this is what made Paranet's dream of defeating death come true, and finally becoming a true Death Knight come true. Oh! Now he's going to bring heat and fear to everyone. Jake thought that Paranet had not changed a bit and ordered him to sit down. The system suggested that for the growing servitors, the master's order was absolute. The slightest disobedience would lead to complete disappearance. The Paramet sat down obediently, his legs crossed. His whole appearance showed a willingness to serve. Jake asked if he understood what was happening. He replied that he heard an unfamiliar voice in his head. He was informed that he was now a servitor. Paranet also said that he regretted having humiliated his master there in the dungeon. Jake wondered why Paranet was pretending there. The skeleton admitted sheepishly that he was a little scared, which is why he hid his weakness behind a show of strength. After all, Jake had killed all the chimeras that had taken years of work. That's why he decided to scare the boy to make him run away. What an irony! The best in hand-to-hand combat, the Death Knight is a coward. Jake decided to get more information about the servitor and immersed himself in reading. The system issued a certificate about the servitor Paranet. Level 68, Survival Instinct at Level A, Evasion Ability at Level C, Main Skill, Poison Alchemy. Everything was as the boy had expected. Jake remembered that he had something in his inventory to grow the servitor. Yes, the necessary elixir was quickly found. It raised the servitor's level to 100. And by chance, I came across Blessing of the Dead. This contraption maximized the effect of the undead. It was so effective that it couldn't be found even for money. Jake took them both, happy that everything had turned out so well. Paranet backed away from the boy as soon as he noticed something in his hands. He stated that the ominous aura of these artifacts made him uncomfortable. Jake was indignant. "It's such a valuable thing." Paranet persisted, insisting that it looked like a cursed object of an ominous color. The boy replied that Paranet himself looked much more ominous. He ordered them to drop the jokes and accept it. Paranet, reacting to the order, immediately changed his behavior. Jake explained that he would hardly feed his servitor anything harmful. After that, Paranet completely relaxed and enthusiastically drank from one of the bottles. The effect was instant. His level rose to 100 and his strength increased significantly. Then Jake placed the Blessing of the Dead crystal on the skeleton's forehead. The Paranet cried out in surprise but quickly fell silent. The crystal flashed. The skeleton was filled with such incredible strength that it simply stretched it wildly. The radiance of this power nearly blinded Jake. He thoughtfully watched the course of events. The power gradually flowed into the servitor, the glow lost intensity, and eventually the crystal ceased to glow. Paranet shouted triumphantly that the time had come for his true powers to awaken. The air around him flashed with lightning from the tension. The system issued updated servitor characteristics. The increase in performance was clearly noticeable. In addition, another skill was added, Corpse Explosion. Jake considered the servitor to be very useful. Thanks to its significant level of magic, it would be useful in many situations. Paranet also looked pleased, and even declared that from now on he would be called exclusively the Chosen Paranet. When the servitor was significantly strengthened, you could try moving to another floor. The camp near the exit of the 4th floor of the Infinity Tower was densely populated. Many players were stuck here, unable to move to another floor. There were calls from everywhere for tanks. They even promised to pay in advance. The players were looking for a tank to raid the 5th floor boss. That boss had no weaknesses. He simply dealt significant damage to players, thereby testing the guilds for strength. Jake rested in the shade, leaning against a tree trunk, and mused that for players below level 100, the challenge with this boss was too serious. Jake alone wouldn't be able to handle him, but Paranet's abilities could be used. There was just one problem. Can Paranet be trusted? Jake decided to observe the camp life and the skills of the other players a little. He knew that the boss was attacked by a team of 4 players. The squad included mages and archers. They were supports. They had good defense. Healers were rare. But they had to take a tank. However, it was not easy to find a good tank, because their defense was the weakest. They were the closest to death. Such is the natural balance. In a cozy clearing, 3 players were discussing that without at least one tank they would be lost. But there weren't enough tanks for everyone. Sometimes the squads went without them. But that was certain death. Jake heard them and decided to come over. He apologized and said that he had overheard their conversation. From it, he understood that they would leave as soon as they found the tank. One guy jumped up happily, deciding that luck had smiled on them and the tank had found itself. The rest of the team gathered around Jack and competed to promise him all possible and impossible benefits. They chattered, not letting him even open his mouth. Finally managed to get in. He explained that he wasn't really a tank. He just wanted to join the team. He was not listened to any further. The group of players left, advising the boy to go where he was going. Jake shouted after them that he could play the role of a tank. The players were intrigued. They stopped and turned around. Jake quickly decided to show them his servitor. All 3 of them jumped back in fear and shouted that they didn't need magic or they would punch Jake in the face. But then they realized that this was a challenge. This is where Paranet came into being. He, like an entertainer, himself announced that this was the appearance of the Death Knight Paranet. The team chatted in astonishment. They had heard of such things, but none of them had ever seen a servitor like this. Jake apologized, but he was in too much of a hurry before the team left. He explained that Paranet could be a tank because he had high defense and couldn't feel pain. In addition, he can take hits more actively than others. And in case of danger, his servitor can be removed and then summoned again. The girl in the group was the first to agree. She thought it was a good idea. One of the guys was skeptical, because a tank is important. A small mistake can cost the guild dearly. The girl argued that even if the assistant is weaker, the damage can be shared. And that's quite an advantage. Jake again assured them that there was nothing to worry about, because even though Paranet wouldn't be able to catch the ogre, his attack and defense powers were quite high. The sarcastic guy didn't give up. And what level is Jake? But the 3rd player let him go. They need help, and they need to go to another floor. The girl apologized for everyone. Her name is Annie. She has a special ability to heal. She is a healer. Annie also has a buff, and she can cover for a short time. Then a guy who had been resisting for a long time introduced himself. His name was Mike. He was a fire mage and a former guild leader. This explained the critical nature of his thinking. The 3rd player was an archer named Stan. He could do serious damage with his arrows. Jake gave his name, and he was accepted into the squad. Mike offered to wait while Jake got ready, but he refused, so they all set off. They agreed to discuss the details on the way. The 5th floor of the dungeon was met with semi-ruins and emptiness. At first, everyone looked around cautiously, and then they went bolder. Mike found out that Jake wasn't on the 5th floor, but he knows about it. So he suggested that Jake be considered experienced. However, if anything happens, he will leave the guild. Jake was hurt by this attitude, but he didn't show it. I wonder how good a player Mike is himself. Paranet interrupted his thoughts. He whispered to Jake whether he really wanted to make him a tank. Jake confirmed. Paranet and the boss's levels were the same, and Paranet's defense is invincible. Paranet was afraid. He was bad at weapons, but he felt most confident with a sword. Jake advised him to go ahead. At this, he handed Paranet a sword with a special attack power that causes bleeding. But he warned that the sword was legendary and that it should be handled with care. Paranet's mood improved significantly. He was delighted with the sword as if it were a new toy. Annie wondered why Jake would give such an expensive sword to his assistant. It seemed suspicious to her. Jake joked that he was just helped by a strong man, but in confidence. The guy didn't want to explain where he got so many items. This is how the team reached the enemy patrol. They were short, green-bellied, and bow-legged mobs. Mike spotted them first and called Jake, and he in turn gave the command to the servitor. The servitor sprang from its place in a flash. The mobs knelt in terror and stood motionless. But Paranet still managed to miss. The situation was saved by a fiery explosion. It was Mike who did his job perfectly. He mockingly teased Jake that Paranet had such serious attack power that maybe he should abandon the idea of a tank. Paranet himself stood with one foot on the neutralized enemy, his sword raised belligerently. Jake decided that everything had turned out even better than he had hoped. Perhaps he had underestimated Paranet. And a horde of mobs was already rushing through the dungeon corridors from all sides, helping the destroyed patrol. Paranet blocked their path. The team lined up behind him. Stan took over the right flank and told Mike to deal with the left. And one by one, the monsters began to fall out of the game. They were hit by fire on the left and arrows on the right. Amidst all this commotion stood Paranet. Jake worked his sword at the enemy. A fierce fight continued for some time, but one by one the enemies fell, while the team remained unharmed. In the end, the path to the boss was clear. After walking a little further, the players saw him. It was a troll. He was lying in the middle of the round tower, snoring loudly. Jake quickly ran through the information in his head. This monster is a real bane for low-level players. He has fantastic defense and attack power. He is brutal and incredibly agile. Surviving a battle with him is very difficult. That's why they use a tank to take the brunt of the damage. Jake also mentioned that the troll has little resistance to fire. Suddenly, Paranet stepped forward. He boldly declared that he would ring the boss himself. Jake hissed that there was no point in trying to climb anywhere without a plan. But it was too late. The troll's eyes opened and stared at the uninvited guests. The system notified that the raid on the fifth-floor boss had begun. The troll, meanwhile, had risen and stood, his column-like legs firmly planted on the floor. He was grandly gigantic and no less ugly. Mike asked anxiously if they shouldn't back off for now, since the tank was slowing down. Jake denied that the tank was fine. At that moment, Paranet just held out his sword and laughed loudly, calling the boss a senseless creature. The troll swung a huge club. Paranet's S-level self-preservation instinct was activated, and he whispered that he felt his death from the first blow. The stick came down with a whistling sound, but the impact point was empty. The stick crashed straight to the floor. Where Paranet had stood a moment ago, only fog was now swirling. The troll stared blankly into this void. His slow brain managed to think that the skeleton had simply been pulverized, and Paranet was already standing behind Jake and whining that they needed to urgently change their strategy. The guy didn't agree. Then he screamed that there was no shame in retreating. Jake explained that if Paranet suddenly died, which was unlikely, Jake would bring him back to life. But the skeleton somewhere above was already demanding in a grumpy voice to give him time to prepare. And then Jake lost his patience. He growled that this was an order and forbade them to retreat. Paranet was dying of fear, but he was forced to obey. The troll finally noticed his opponent and moved straight at him. The stick described a wide arc in the air. Paranet barely had time to duck to avoid danger. At the same time, he suggested that the troll stop the fight and come to an agreement. In response, he received another attack. The team stood aside. Mike was surprised by the servitor's behavior. Jake explained that he was a bit cowardly, but everything would be fine because he had the necessary skills. And in the center of the tower, something fantastic was happening. Paranet, dodging and running away from blows with lightning speed. The clumsy troll thought he was a midge. Stan still couldn't figure out how that damn skeleton managed to dodge like that. Annie got the impression that he could sense attacks in advance. Friends wondered how one could be afraid of the fifth-floor boss possessing S-rank instinct. But if Paranet hadn't been such a coward, he could have blown everything here to pieces. Paranet's sword scratched the boss several times. The boss, unable to contain his rage, decided to brace himself for a more powerful attack. Jake could see that Paranet was too afraid to do any serious damage to the troll. The shallow wounds were healing quickly. It seemed the battle was dragging on. Then a bright flash shot towards the troll. A continuous flame engulfed him. Stan rushed to the attack, anticipating a first-class swing. Jake shouted frantically that it was too early. Mike gave him a scornful look. The timing was perfect. Hadn't Jake ever heard of the 5-minute rule that everyone on the raids knew about? Jake froze in shock. What are the rules? What is this? A driving test to stupidly memorize the rules? The rules are always based on strategy. That's why they change. The troll let out a frantic cry of pain. It was Stan who shot him straight in the eye with an arrow. The calculation was that eyes regenerate more slowly, despite the boss's outstanding regeneration. But the troll's pain quickly subsided. The eye was restored and the monster stared straight at its offender. The troll yearned for revenge. Stan, realizing the seriousness of the situation, feverishly felt for the arrow behind his back. Jake shouted a warning for everyone to dodge because the ogre jumped out. Mike honestly didn't understand what was happening. The 5-minute rule had been followed. What the hell? Annie was tensely creating a shield to cover her friend. A rainbow ball formed around Stan, resembling a soap bubble but much stronger. He found himself in a state of weightlessness. The feeling was great, but it didn't last long. The troll's blow shattered the shield and Stan fell to the floor. He lost half his health. Annie immediately rushed to restore it. Mike ordered them to stand back and wait for Paranet to bother the boss again. But the cunning troll had his own plan. He managed to notice Annie and move towards her. Mike guessed the boss's intentions, but there was nothing he could do. The monster's giant hand was already reaching for the girl, and everyone understood that it was too late. No one would have time to fix it. The next moment the troll was thrown aside by a terrible blow, and Jake, picking Annie up in his arms, carried her to a safer place. Mike and Stan smiled happily. It seemed to them both that disaster was imminent, but it turns out that miracles still happen sometimes. Even Paramet opened his mouth in admiration of his master. Jake ordered him to protect the healer, and he himself decided to act. Annie realized that Jake was up to something and tried to stop him. The guy objected that there was no time to delay now. The boss was regenerating too quickly. Time was against them. They had to finish the boss off right now. Jake bravely faced the enemy. The boss was furious. His eyes glowed predatorily, his mouth foamed, and a low growl rang out from it, making the floor vibrate. Jake calmly awaited the attack. The troll didn't hesitate. He rushed forward, swinging his bat left and right, not particularly aiming because anger blurred his eyes. Jake managed to get a good hit on him with his sword. The boy was delighted. Everything was going even better than he could have hoped. Stan and Mike looked at each other in shock. Jake went with a tank? What kind of skill was this that he was able to hit the boss with a sword? The troll launched a final attack. He decided to finish off this little man. The troll, thrusting forward with its entire massive body, rammed into Jake. He prepared himself, but suddenly the boss changed his mind. He decided to deal with Annie first. A giant shadow passed over Jake's head, a draft ruffled his hair, and the troll disappeared. The next moment the boy realized what had happened, but he still couldn't believe that the multi-ton carcass of a troll had managed to make such a dizzying leap. The monster was approaching Annie, whom Paranet covered with himself. The troll roared to get the damned shard out of the way. Paranet was calling his master in a panic, because he had no idea what to do. Mike understood that the healer must not suffer, otherwise it was all over for them. He decided to attack the boss at any cost, just to thwart his plans. But he didn't have time, because the troll's head flew off his shoulders. She rolled, spinning like a devil's top. The entire team, wide-eyed, tried to figure out how to take the boss's head off with one blow. Jake was catching his breath. If it weren't for the mandatory requirement that the boss's room could only be entered as a team, the boy could have made it to the 5th floor by himself. He didn't even expect it to be so easy. But now it doesn't matter. The main thing is that he made it to the 5th floor. The system notified you of eliminating the troll, opening the next floor, increasing your level, and obtaining a shield made from troll bones. The team actively discussed the victory. Everyone admitted that it was entirely Jake's merit. Annie was grateful for the rescue. She added Jake to the messenger. Everyone said a warm goodbye to the guy because he had made an unforgettable impression on them. They promised to contact him when they found a good dungeon, and Jake left. And the friends were a little sorry. Stan said it would be nice to continue as one squad. Mike replied that as long as you can do it alone, there is no point in being in a team. But maybe they will meet again someday, so we need to practice and improve our skills. Jake moved along the 9th floor. It was a desert, dotted with strange rocks. As far as the eye could see, there was not a single living soul in sight. Suddenly, one of the rocks exploded with a fountain of stones, and a giant scorpion appeared from there. The boy grabbed his sword and slashed with all his might. The scorpion split in half, and then its remains dissolved into the air with a hiss. Finally, he could rest. After the 5th floor, he managed to climb the next ones without any problems, but it became increasingly difficult. And the last round took a lot of strength. The system notification flashed with a message. The boss of the 9th floor of the Desert Scorpion has been eliminated. The next floor opens. Received the rare title Experienced Conqueror. Jake had expected this. He had already received this title when he played as a free player. The status window reported that Jake was a level 81 player. All of his stats had been given rewards. Paranet ran out from behind the rocks, waving his arms happily. They had reached the 9th floor in just half a day. What a cool owner he had. Jake was once again mentally glad he had such a servitor, because he kept reviving. Before going up to the 10th floor, Jake decided to go into the dungeon. When he played as free player, he couldn't get there. He couldn't fulfill the conditions. This place could well have been the entrance to the next stage of training of infernal complexity. But he had had quite a bit of experience, and they set off across the desert. There was a passage in the rock. 2 boys approached it. One of them, a blonde athlete, was afraid of falling into a dungeon that no one could enter. His outstretched hand encountered an invisible obstacle. The system reported a failure to meet the previous requirements and the inability to enter the ancient ruins. The boy cursed. His companion, who was black and dark-skinned, suggested that they stop trying and retreat. The blonde chirped for him to stop whining. Isn't it interesting to get to a place where even rankers go? How much loot could there be in this cave? The dark-skinned man replied that it was interesting. But you can't spend another month trying in vain to get through where there is no passage. Even the strongest rankers couldn't get through and gave up. The fair-haired man optimistically declared that he had enough willpower not to give up, and his comrade should just shut up if he wasn't able to support him. Suddenly the boys heard someone approaching. They quickly hid as they had done every time before. Jake and Paranet approached the door. The boys watched them from hiding. They appreciated Jake's cool outfit. The dark-skinned man even whispered that this stranger might know how to get in. The comrade agreed. For Jake looked confident in himself. But who knows him? The guys saw more than one strong player, and none of them succeeded. They were all forced to return with nothing. At that moment, Jake raised his hand to the passage, which was shimmering with light. His entire figure was illuminated by the same shimmer, and Jake easily slipped inside. The guys jumped out of their hiding place. Did anyone succeed? They rushed forward as fast as they could until the portal closed. The blonde, unfortunately, turned out to be more agile. He ran up first and, with all his might, he poked his nose into the passage that did not allow him into the dungeon. And the system, as if mockingly, issued the same mocking message about non-compliance with the previous requirements. The blonde was starting to boil. How did the stranger get in? How did he manage to meet the entry requirements? The comrade fueled this anger by asking what was so special about that boy that the blonde didn't have. Finally, the guy found a solution. He had to wait until the nimble stranger came out of the cave, then capture him and rob him. His partner supported this plan. And the blonde muttered that he was sure it would definitely be 5. Jake was walking through the dungeon with Paranet at that time. It looked like a luxurious palace. The floor was covered with marble tiles, and the walls of the spacious corridors were decorated with paintings that resembled Egyptian ones. The boy was actively turning his head from side to side and looking around. Paranet was looking around with fascination, because he himself had lived in a dungeon before. They reached a stone elevation with a fresco. It resembled an altar. The system next to him announced that the training of the hellish level of complexity was entering a new stage, and asked if Jake was ready to begin the test. The guy was happy because he was finally convinced that this was indeed the place he wanted to go. Of course, he confirmed his readiness to start. The altar lit up brightly. A screen appeared instead of the fresco. The system wrote that there was another character before the current players. A holographic image of a beautiful girl appeared. The system continued. This player flew freely in the sky, parted the sea, and turned the earth over. Everyone admired her. The pictures on the altar were changing. Jake stared at the images and didn't understand what they were about. Something new. He had never heard of anything like this before. The system further revealed that the original players existed to protect the world from invasion by ancient races. One of them alone stopped the aggressive invasion. For this, people considered her not just a hero, but a deity, and worshipped her. Jake wondered if the title of the game might be related to this story. But there was no time to think, as the story continued. The evil gods and their followers launched a new invasion, which the first player could no longer handle on her own. Therefore, she gave her followers the abilities of players, and rewarded them with a power that was useful to humanity. After long battles, the human forces concentrated in the players at the beginning defeated evil and stopped the enemy attack. Finally, Jake realized that he was being shown features of the distant past and was talking about the origin of the starting player, or the first player. This story was very different from the one the boy had heard before. Why was he being told all this? It was clearly a clue, but it had to be dealt with. A message appeared that the introduction was complete, and now the test actually began. Jake was surprised that it started abruptly, not like usual, without pressing the start button. But there was no one to complain about. A ring of portal appeared around Jake, and the boy seemed to dissolve into it. And in a moment he was in another place. It was empty. Not even that. It was absolute emptiness, and all of Jake's equipment was gone. While he was looking around, trying to understand where he had been thrown, the system announced the start of the test. Task: battle with the starting player. Jake was set to level 1. A message also warned that defeat meant failure of training at the Hell level. That's how it is. How is this level 1? Where did the stats, titles, and inventory go? What kind of arbitrariness is this? And where is Paranet? Jake tried to summon him several times, but it was all in vain. The guy began to despair. After all, how could he defeat a player in such a state who had single-handedly stopped the invasion and defeated the evil gods? This was some kind of delusion. But it was not in his nature to give up. If this world is a game, then the test is a quest, so there must be a way to get through it. Suddenly something flashed behind me. It was a player from the beginning of level 1 who appeared, a beautiful blonde girl with long hair. She said that she had been waiting for a follower to appear for a very long time. Jake remembered that he had seen her before. So the follower was someone who had undergone training at the hellish level? Who would have guessed that a super high difficulty tutorial would hide such an important quest? Jake clarified what kind of player the starter and follower were. The girl said that she couldn't answer, and that this body was only given the role of testing the player. Therefore, Jake has only one task: to win or fail. And she threw up her hand with the wooden sword. A wooden sword? Are you serious? But then Jake thought that it was not in his nature to avoid fights. Since both players were level 1, he could try to win with stats. The girl gestured for me to attack. She said I could choose any weapon available at level 1. Jake, laughing, thought she would regret her words. He didn't expect to ever use it again, but... The girl stared at Jake in surprise, not understanding what she was seeing. He explained that this is a super beginner's kit, and now he will demonstrate all its advantages. She narrowed her eyes in a polite way and said she was disappointed. Can you really rely only on inventory? Jake called her a bore and noted that he killed players who relied solely on their skills in droves. The girl accused Jake of arrogance and promised to teach him a lesson and prove that equipment is not the main thing. Jake was no longer amused. She was driving him crazy. So shouting that now they would find out who was right, he rushed forward. In a leap, he brought his sword behind his head and prepared to slash furiously with it. The girl took a defensive position, her sword drawn, and continued to laugh. Because who rushes into an attack without thinking through a strategy? No! Logic wins over assertiveness. Jake's first blow split the wooden weapon in half. She blinked, and Jake mockingly asked to show how logic wins. The sword flashed an inch from her face. The girl screamed and flew backwards in a stunning triple somersault. She had no time to get to her feet when Jake was already standing over her and asked if she was ready to repeat everything she had said before. The girl was forced to admit that she underestimated her opponent, but noted that the real fight had not yet begun. At the same time, she took out a real sword, a heroic one, the one that the boss of this level had. Jake noticed that the girl was changing her principles too quickly. After all, recently she had supposedly proven that skills were more important than subjects. That girl growled at him to shut up. Her eyes burned with a bloodthirsty glare. She no longer resembled that modest beauty. She was an angry panther. Jake received a message from the system that he was under the influence of bloodlust and was given the fear status. The guy thought that maybe the bosses were using fear induction, so he activated his cool-headed mode. The fear effect was nullified. The girl didn't expect Jake to recover so quickly. She started walking around the boy in a circle. Then she delivered a strong, whirling blow. He reacted and blocked it. The girl continued to tease Jake and reminded him that the one with the coolest skills would still win. The guy was surprised to find that she easily bypassed his protection, and then he got hit in the head. He flew a few meters and fell backwards. Tack! The blow was a no-brainer. Jake was coming to his senses. But it's unlikely she can't do much damage since he's in the rookie superset. The rival was already standing nearby, angry, nervous. She couldn't figure out what kind of magic Jake was using. She hit him right in the head and he didn't even get a scratch. Jake, rising, replied that she had no idea how much his equipment cost. It would take all day to break down the defenses and deal damage. The girl laughed cheekily and hit again. It was a tangible blow. Jake was hurt, but that was it. The defense worked. He suggested they simply stop the fight and declare him a follower. She called that nonsense and raised her sword again. Jake stood still. His opponent asked if he was going to defend himself at all. It took him an incredible effort to remain still in order to accumulate strength. Finally, he attacked. Powerfully, assertively. The girl dodged the blows with acrobatic jumps. She understood that he knew little about strategy, but she was impressed by how thoughtful his every move was. Jake realized that he had good defense but not enough strength. The girl suggested surrendering. But surrender was still far from imminent. The opponents were once again engaged in battle. She annoyed Jake, repeating that her victory was a matter of time. He who laughs last laughs best. According to the boy's calculations, the decisive moment was not far away. He just needed to gather his strength. In one of the next fights, the girl blocked Jake's blow, and suddenly her sword cracked again. She froze in shock for a moment, and that split second of pause was costly. She saw too late that Jake had struck again, but she didn't have time to dodge. The girl was bitter that she had lost a lot of health because of the broken sword. Even heroic swords are short-lived. The chances of that were 50-50ths. And again, Jake suggested simply accepting him as a follower. The girl wanted to choose a talented fighter, but admitted that she had no choice, although she did not expect to lose to a boy who believed too much in equipment. Jake couldn't keep quiet. He slung his sword over his shoulder and declared that equipment was quite important, because he saw many who thought skills were more important. Where are they? He killed them. Hundreds. And it's simple. The system works for those who spend more money. The girl disagreed. She thought Jake was talking about something pathetic. But the results said the opposite. She lost, and she admitted this fact. Finally, she called Jake a follower, ordered him to go where she couldn't reach him, and disappeared. The system came to life, announcing that Jake had achieved the impossible and received the mythical title of starting player. Notifications poured in one after another. Jake was awarded the title of beginner player. Race rank increased by 1 level. Legendary chest received. There were countless reports of level increases in general. Jake was happy to finally reach his old level, which he had when he played as free play. He understood that without the newbie's superset, he was unlikely to make it. If you invest money in the game, even the hellish difficulty will be easy. Then he decided to collect all his rewards. This is the most pleasant. The bonuses were great. A 25% increase in all abilities, 4 unallocated points for each level increase, 80 unassigned points as a starting player. For evolving to the starting player, magic points increased by 80. At the same time, the starting player's equipment level limits were reduced by 50, while retaining all bonuses. With each new bonus, Jake's eyes got bigger and bigger. Then I felt like flying with happiness. The player's overall characteristics were impressive. Level 102 and all stats, skills, magic power, and points have increased significantly. The guy was delighted. Cool results. It didn't matter now that he started 5 years later. With that advantage, he would quickly catch up and surpass everyone. The legendary chest will give you another rainbow sticker. And with the rainbow sticker and title, you can wear gear above level 150. Unrealistically cool achievements. Now you can also upgrade equipment. Meanwhile, night had fallen over the desert, scattering a selection of bright stars across the clear sky. The 2 boys who had planned the attack on Jake were sitting by the fire opposite the entrance to the dungeon. They were tired of waiting, but they understood that sooner or later the boy would have to come out. And indeed, after a while, the portal flashed brightly. The robbers realized that they had finally caught up. They quickly extinguished the fire and fell silent in their ambush, never taking their eyes off the entrance. Jake emerged from the portal. He was no longer the same guy who had come in. His equipment was gone. Jake was surprised to see that the day had passed. He had been in the dungeon too long. He had lost track of time as he picked out his gear. He had chosen the coolest of his class, the Fury set. All items boosted certain skills if the battle lasted more than 3 minutes. Gloves boosted attack. Breastplate increased defense by 30%. The Cloak of Fury added 10% to defense. And the Boots of Fury increased agility by 8%. Jake's weapon now was a special magical sword called the Magic Sword of Bazur. It had unparalleled magical potential. The guys in the ambush noticed the changes. They realized that the new equipment was a reward they received there, in the dungeon. They decided to attack quickly and grab their weapons. But Jake spotted them before they could jump out. He suggested they stop hiding and finally come out. The blond man gritted his teeth. The surprise effect, which should have been an advantage, had clearly been lost. But suddenly his partner pointed to something above. Raising their heads, the boys saw that all around, high on the rocks, were figures in cloaks with hoods pulled low over their heads. They attacked. Jake stood in the background of the portal as if in the palm of his hand. Explosions erupted, brightly illuminating everything around. The 2 in the ambush didn't understand what was happening, but they saw that they were outnumbered by both Jake and the attackers in terms of strength and equipment. So they decided to lie down so they wouldn't be attacked. The men in black continued to attack. They had what looked like torches, but they were weapons. It generated fiery concentric circles, similar to rings of cigarette smoke. They flew in a given direction and exploded powerfully. The guys who were going to rob Jake realized that they were flying by. It was obvious that the prey they were counting on would go to the stronger ones. Jake stood there motionless. Everything around him was burning, smoking, and exploding, and he just calmly watched the whole ordeal, as if it didn't concern him. The blonde from the ambush stared at Jake in a daze, not understanding how this could be real. Maybe it was a hallucination. But it was real. It was just that the armor reliably protected Jake. The attackers were lower level than him, so their attacks did not cause any damage. The attackers also couldn't understand why Jake was still alive and well and who he was. He wasn't signed as a boss or a monster. What was the matter? One realized that it was an equipment effect, and such effects take a long time to reload and don't work several times in a row. Therefore, he ordered to continue the attack and to take careful aim at the boy. Jake saw who was giving the order and understood who was the leader in the gang. He made a lightning attack. In a moment, the gang leader was left with a stump of a sword in his hands, and then the leader himself was gone. The other attackers stopped, hesitating. They saw their leader instantly eliminated by a cunning attack. Jake asked who they were and why they attacked. One of the enemies responded by attacking with arrows, but the ordinary arrows were no more dangerous than flies to Jake's armor. They all fell at his feet. The bandits again did not understand what these miracles were. But there were many of them. They decided to attack at the same time. Together they rushed at the boy, bumping into each other in their frenzy. Jake's sword stabbed, slashed, and struck beautifully and virtuously, as if dancing. The enemy corpses flew in different directions. One of the attackers asked where such a monster came from and slashed at it with his sword. The boy was momentarily blinded by the weapon's complexity, but it didn't do any damage. Although the effect of the ultimate was unpleasant to feel even with the rage set. The bandits retreated and consulted. Jake estimated that the team had long-range mages, archers, a warrior guard, and a tank. They were annoying him. One sneaked up from behind, hit Jake, and shouted to the others to finish the guy off with magic. Magic rings flew en masse. They created a real fireworks display with lightning flashes and dazzling explosions. While Jake was in the middle of this fire show, one of the fighters charged in. He figured that the magical attack had damaged the boy, and now was the time to finish him off. But Jake guessed the enemy's intentions. Clearing his throat of smoke, he said that he had to disappoint, because both close and long-range magical attacks hit him in the head. The bandits didn't understand how the guy managed to survive. After all, equipment, even very powerful, still needs to be recharged. Jake emerged from the curtain of magical fire and declared that the bandits had miscalculated badly. It doesn't have any special effect. It's just a very high level of protection. And with that, Jake summoned Paranet. A pillar of fire shot high into the sky, creating a bizarre pattern there. A few seconds later, Paranet emerged from the fire, appearing at the call of his master. One of the bandits asked incredulously if this was the beast everyone was talking about. That's how Jake realized that the gang was waiting for him. The attacker explained that the ruins belonged to them, but no one could enter them. So they watched and waited to find out the conditions of entry. Meanwhile, Paranet smashed the remnants of the gang. Jake snorted that it was all nonsense because the ruins belonged to the first person to enter them. But why attack? The bandit couldn't answer, and Jake realized that the attackers were stupidly following orders. He hated being hunted. The bandit hissed angrily that they had thought the task was much easier and had not expected such resistance. Jake replied that he had much more reason to be angry. After all, he wasn't the one who attacked first. The enemy had one last argument left. He attacked, but Jake quickly destroyed both the argument and the attacker himself. The system reported that the starting player has the right to punish the offending players. Also, no karma is accrued for killing a player. Jake noted that his karma had automatically adjusted. That was cool. Paranet was racing towards him from afar. He had accomplished his task, and a couple of losers from the ambush decided to go and get drunk about staying alive. Jake and Paranet reached the mysterious field on the 9th floor. A waterfall blocked their path. There was a hidden boss somewhere here. Although the boss should be hidden, there was nothing around to indicate his presence. But that was the point. The boss was a master of water control and merged with it. Paranet asked what to do. Should the waterfall really be drained? Jake replied that it was necessary to act with cunning, not force. Before the skeleton could express his surprise, he suddenly flew off a steep cliff, accelerated by Jake's kick. As he flew downward, Jake kept a close eye on the water. At first it was quiet, then a red light blinked faintly, and a giant fish jumped out of it, moving towards Paranet. Jake smiled. It seemed the bait had worked and the fish had bitten. He jumped up without wasting any time. He spun in the air, sword drawn. The fish's head separated from the rest of its body, hovered for a moment, then flopped into the water. Paranet narrowly escaped danger. Jake also completed a jump into the pond. A system notification reported multiple level increases for defeating the basilisk with one blow and the awarding of the legendary title Great Attack Power. Jake had just emerged from the water when another message came in that the guy had done the impossible. Therefore, he received a chest with a legendary item of his choice. He beamed with delight. This award surpassed all his wildest expectations. The basilisk was usually defeated by a team, like the troll from the 5th floor. But because it was on the surface, not in a dungeon, even a lone player had a chance to win. Another system window reported an increase in attack power of 10. Jake had all of this before he even reached the 10th floor, and legendary titles were much more important than legendary items. Jake knew that the legendary titles were added. If he collected them, he would soon reach the level of his former power. Paranet surfaced. It was time to move to the next floor. The 10th floor appeared as the tops of rugged mountain peaks, around which clouds swirled. Jake stood in the middle of the mountain forest and remembered that there was also a dungeon with rewards here. The location was dangerous, not for beginners, only for higher levels. Here one could die even from being hit by a stone thrown by someone of a higher level. Here an encounter with such freaks as near the ruins did not bode well for him. So he decided to disguise himself. To do this, he used the apple of invisibility. If eaten, the presence was hidden for 30 minutes, and all traces left behind were destroyed. Jake had kept it for protection against the killers, but now it was more needed. The boy also hid the paranet. Then he ate the apple, got 30 minutes of cover, and hurried forward. Jake didn't run, but almost flew through the forest so as not to lose precious time. He hoped the dungeon was well hidden, because if too many people crowded there, his invisibility would disappear. Jake reached almost the top of the mountain, where the forest thinned considerably. He climbed the trunk of an old tree, and from there he saw what he was looking for. The cytamine mine. The entrance was half blocked with rocks and looked abandoned, but Jake knew that the entrance to the dungeon was hidden inside the mine. He was about to head towards the rock, but suddenly he heard a dirty word. A moment later, 2 elf girls appeared in sight. One was indignant that the Dark Ones wanted to take what did not belong to them. The other hushed her up because the Dark Ones had ears everywhere. Jake wondered where the elves came from. From the conversation, he understood that the light and dark elves were at war, but before they had normal relations. What happened here? Time was running out. The boy had to go to the mine. He had no desire to conflict with the elves, because they were part of an interracial union. Maybe he could sneak through? But while he was thinking, the elves increased in number, and the apple effect was almost over. We had to come up with something. Jake began to look through his inventory. The solution had to be here somewhere, and it was found. The pear of inspiration. It gave the effect of unity with nature for 3 days, and the seed of Yggdrasil. At first, Jake quickly crunched the pear. Elves are connected to nature, and so the boy's connection with it grew stronger. Then the seed. The plant was a treasure for the elves. No, even something much greater. Yggdrasil strengthened the race, gave prosperity, and solved the problem of offspring. The seed was extremely rare. It was given to those who donated more than 30 million. Jake was sorry to use it, but circumstances, and he had 6 more in stock. One of the elves caught a scent, the scent of a human. They all prepared for battle and ordered to go out. Jake raised his hands and said he was leaving. He asked not to shoot because he had the seed of Yggdrasil. He offered negotiations. One elf actually saw the seed of a sacred plant in the boy's hands. This was a good sign. The elves talked. Some doubted that the seed was real. Others replied that judging by the smell, the boy was not lying. Jake wanted to continue. But suddenly an angry elf shouted that their race had suffered enough by trusting humans. The boy knew about the eternal confrontation between elves and humans, but he did not remove the seed. Another elf suddenly stepped forward and asked to be given the opportunity to check. Everyone screamed in surprise, whispering her name almost in unison. "Madame Audrey." She asked again for the opportunity to check. Jake knew that Audrey was the main elf. He handed her the seed. It was real, and Jake was sure that Audrey would know it immediately. The elf stopped right in front of the boy and froze, closing her eyes. I wonder how she was going to understand anything. But then Mrs. Audrey's eyes widened, and covering her mouth in delight, she said that she could feel the aura of Yggdrasil. Unbelievably, the seed was real. Jake threw his hand up happily, grateful for the confirmation of the truth of his words. Then he asked if the elves were ready for further negotiations. At that, the seed disappeared from his hand. Audrey sobbed in disappointment, not taking her eyes off her empty palm. The elves whispered, "Miss Audrey couldn't be wrong. So this guy really has Yggdrasil, and they really need him." Finally, Audrey told Jake that they agreed to talk. But first she asked for clarification. Jake brought Yggdrasil to trade. The guy confirmed that it was true, that he knew how valuable he was to the elves. It was Audrey's turn to agree, for Yggdrasil was truly a priceless treasure for them. "But the elves don't agree to the exchange." Jake jumped at the sudden announcement. "Why? Audrey said the elves wouldn't take the seed if it didn't work." Jake was extremely confused. What was the matter? If the elves aren't satisfied with just the Yggdrasil seed, Jake could add something else. Just let them tell you what they need. But that turned out not to be the case. The elves refused because they had nothing to give in return. That wasn't a problem. Jake had an idea and asked to be heard. The elves didn't understand anything. What kind of idea was this? However, our ears perked up, ready to listen carefully. The boy offered to give the seed in exchange for 2 simple requests. Miss Audrey looked Jake carefully in the eyes and said she believed him. But the deal has to be fair. Jake noted that everyone has different values. Audrey asked what he wanted specifically. "But it's not that difficult. You just need permission to enter the mine." Audrey clearly didn't like it. The rest of the elves generally made a fuss that he was a messenger of the Dark Elves and were ready to kill him on the spot. Jake raised both hands in a conciliatory gesture and sincerely assured that he had never even seen Dark Elves. The head elf stopped their argument. She ordered the elves to retreat, because she saw that the boy was not lying and was really not connected to the Dark Elves in any way. Jake sighed in relief. The elf must have a special knack for discerning the truth. Then he said he had no claim to the elven cytomy ore, but only wanted to explore the mine. Mistress Audrey demanded details. Why did he need to explore the mine? Jake replied that it was a secret. However, he did not wish evil on the elves, and he reminded them that the seed of Yggdrasil was at stake. Audrey saw that he was sincere and agreed to let him into the mine. Jake wanted guarantees, so he said he would give the seed when he returned. But Audrey replied that she would guarantee his safety. They had to trust each other and fulfill their agreements. Trust? Oh, how? Jake nodded at the 3 elves behind him. Is this the same trust? Although he understood that he would have to accept it. After all, you can always wash away if something goes wrong. He looked around at his guards. The elf girls were new. Everything in the mine was incomprehensible. The paths twisted and turned, confusing it like a labyrinth. Could it really have changed so much in just a few years? One of the elves accompanying the boy asked if his name was really Jake. He confirmed it. She asked again if he was really from another world. Jake nodded and asked how she guessed. The girl replied that he was not like the others, and people from other worlds, as a rule, love elves. Isn't that right? The boy didn't object. He explained that people from his world liked everything beautiful. The elf was pleased. She said that she liked him a little too. Jake chuckled to himself. Thanks to the pair, his appeal to the elves was no surprise. The elf didn't hesitate. Now she was interested in what kind of elves Jake liked, dark or light. And what do you say? The answer was obvious. Jake assured her that he liked fair elves. The elf blushed and said that she had no doubt about it. Suddenly, somewhere in the darkness, a stern voice rang out, warning the light not to be impudent. The elf looked around in confusion. Jake reacted instantly. He pushed the elf aside and took the attack on himself, deflecting the arrow. The girl flew away. She hit her back painfully against a stone. Jake noticed that there was also shooting from the other side. One of the elves crouched down, holding her injured hand. The other bent over her, concerned. Dark elves emerged from the darkness of the mine. One said that it was quite unusual for a human to dodge an arrow. Jake didn't understand how the dark elves could have gotten into the mine to the light ones. The elf girl, who the boy had thrown away from the arrow, turned to the head elf, named Cariel. She asked what they were doing here. After all, there was a guard at the entrance. He laughed mockingly. Is she so stupid that she doesn't understand that the mine has more than one entrance? They heard about the boy with the seed. That's why they demand that she be given to the dark elves. Jake immediately thought that the Dark Ones couldn't have learned about the seed so quickly. Someone leaked this information to them. Is there a spy among the Light Ones? The Light Elves asked why the Dark Elves attacked. After all, under the terms of the interracial agreement, any conflicts are prohibited. The Dark Elf was enjoying the situation. Would anyone dare to suspect them, even if they were killing everyone here right now? A person must make a choice. Jake thought feverishly. The Dark Ones were firing arrows to kill. But if you give them the seed, what guarantee is there that they will be released? The brave little elf stepped forward resolutely and ordered them to be quiet. No one was going to give them anything. The leader of the Dark Ones chuckled uncomfortably. The arrow whistled a centimeter from the elf's head. A fight broke out. The other two girls rushed at the leader of the Dark Ones. He scattered them like dolls. Jake and the elf watched in horror. One of the girls crashed into the wall at breakneck speed. The other Dark One slammed his head down on the stone floor. The third elf rushed there, calling her friend Xenia. The Dark One ordered her to stay put. Otherwise, Xenia risks losing her head. She froze in indecision. At the same time, she trembled wildly with rage and helplessness. The leader again called on Jake to give up the seed. It was obvious that the elves were unable to protect him. The guy realized that the opponent's level was no lower than 200, and his agility was pumped. Now he was lucky to meet a hunter of low-level players. He wondered aloud if his life was guaranteed. The elf was desperately screaming for Jake not to give anything away. Meanwhile, the boy was stalling for time, because the effects of his equipment started to take effect 3 minutes after the start of the battle. There were 2 left. The Dark One promised life not only to Jake, but even to the elves. The guy understood that he could have left the Light Ones and gone with the Dark Ones, but that was mean. He asked to release the hostage, and then they could come to an agreement. The Dark One looked up at Jake. Why was he doubting? The boy explained that he couldn't trust anyone who was taking hostages. He laughed cheekily. He explained that Jake had no choice. If he didn't give the Yggdrasil seed voluntarily, the Dark Ones would take it themselves, from the corpse. Jake looked at the motionless elf by the wall and declared that he would swallow the seed if the Dark One pressed so brazenly. The elf leader squinted, studying the boy intently. He was worried that Jake was too calm. Wasn't he scared? Finally, the system came to life, and messages were sent that the effects of the gloves, cloak, boots, and breastplate of fury had been activated. Jake replied that the Dark One was right, but from the moment he let Jake buy time, he had already lost. The elf's fists clenched in anger. He couldn't believe his ears. At that moment, Jake fired a dark cloud of skunk. It was a heroic item created by the wizard wind that emitted smoke and reduced visibility. Immediately, the entire space of the mine was plunged into darkness. The elf was literally bursting with anger. The system notified that the dark zone was activated. The shouts of the attackers were heard from everywhere. They did not understand what kind of smoke it was. They tried not to inhale it, so as not to get poisoned. They were also afraid of hurting one of their own. The leader shouted that the smoke wasn't harmful, that it was just a trick to distract attention. He ordered them not to move and to watch carefully. Meanwhile, Jake ate the apple of invisibility. His presence became hidden. The chief elf became alert. His senses were pumped to the max, but he could no longer sense humans. The elf was also confused. She could only call out helplessly for Jake. Suddenly, a hand grabbed the leader from behind, covering his mouth. He panicked and wondered how this had happened. Jake whispered that you can't rely on your level alone. The most important thing is your equipment. The elf continued to call Jake. Something incomprehensible was happening around her. Voices in the darkness shouted from time to time. Someone shouted that a person was nearby, someone pointed in the direction, and someone called out to their leader. The girl was scared and confused. Here and there, individual wisps of light flashed. And then Jake appeared. She finally saw him because the smoke began to clear. When my eyes adjusted, it became clear that all the enemies were dead. The elf exclaimed in admiration that Jake had dealt with the elite dark unit incredibly quickly. Cariel, the elven leader, sat leaning against the wall, bleeding profusely. He couldn't believe that he had been defeated by a mere boy barely above level 100. The girl, stunned, asked him why he was attacking. After all, their clans were on good terms. But he huffed arrogantly, refusing to explain anything. He only said that Lord Stillen would arrive soon and take revenge. The girl was seriously scared when she heard about the Lord. Jake didn't let Cariel finish and finished him off with a sword blow. Then he grumbled contemptuously that there was no point in talking about revenge on the one who attacked first. The boy was getting a notification about a level increase. The elf was in despair. The strongest warrior of the dark is coming here. Lord Stillen. We need to get out of here. Because Jake can't handle him. He's a real monster. Jake froze in thought. Indeed, Stillen was strong. The first time the guy got stuck in the game was on it. That's when he decided to establish relations with the Dark Elves, although he had to die a bunch of times to do so. Meanwhile, the elves were coming to their senses. The boy ordered them to go to the camp and warn their people about another entrance to the mine and prepare a counterattack. And what will he do himself? He alone will be able to move unnoticed. And I don't want to go back, since he's already here. Then the guy realized that the girls wouldn't make it in that state, so he took out the stones of return from his inventory. I handed one to each of them. He ordered them to get out of here and leave him alone. The elves initially stared at him wildly. Then they realized that in this state they would only be a hindrance, and the best thing they could do was bring in reinforcements. Jake wished them luck. The elves disappeared. Jake was finally alone. It was a huge relief for him. But suddenly, a timid voice from one of the girls was heard. It turned out that she had stayed with him. The elf wanted to accompany the boy to help. She assured him that she also had stealth skills. Jake clutched his head, but she kept assuring him that she would help. Even if they met Stillen, she could distract him to buy time for Jake. The guy just wanted to be alone. But he understood perfectly well that now was not the time to spoil relations with the Light Elves, especially since the Dark Ones were already against him. Finally, Jake agreed. He ordered them to follow him, at least until Stillen showed up, and they rushed forward. 10 minutes later, a young warrior elf entered the hall where the fight had taken place. It was Lord Stillen. He looked closely at the bodies of the Dark Ones. They were being killed from behind. He approached Cariel. He realized that he had also been attacked from behind and then finished off. They all died in the open, caught off guard. So the enemy is using stealth or invisibility. The Lord's men reported that they had found traces of the magic of return, but had lost track of the man. Apparently they were frightened by the pursuit and returned, but Stillen objected. Yes, he didn't sense a person, but he clearly sensed the presence of the elf. We must follow her. Suddenly he noticed a half-eaten apple. I immediately realized what it was and warned my friends that a person knows how to avoid surveillance, so we need to be careful. At that time, Jake and the elf were walking through the tunnel. The girl asked if the boy really knew the way. He said more or less. He wasn't sure, though, because things could change over time. They were at a dead end. But Jake said it was exactly what he was looking for. The girl looked around, but there was nothing there. An ordinary cave with no exit. A dead end. Jake crouched down and fumbled with his hands on the floor. Finally found it. Not all the marks were erased. Some of the signs remained intact. The elf girl received a message that the player Jake was inviting her to join the team. She blinked. "Why was that?" Jake replied sharply, telling her to accept the invitation quickly because time was short. The enemy was already near. The footsteps of the Lord and his companions really echoed loudly off the walls of the mine. In a moment he was standing in front of Jake, blocking the way to the exit. Squinting one eye, he scanned both figures with the other. He was convinced that he was facing the same player who had killed his brother. Jake, in his defense, replied that he had only killed him because he had attacked first. He had to defend himself. Stillen said that the elves' goal was the seeds of Yggdrasil. Why was Jake getting in their way? He himself couldn't understand how a level 100 player could handle those who were far beyond the 200th. Jake boldly declared that he had made a deal with the Light Ones. Do I really need any more explanation? The Lord agreed that there was no point in talking to the enemy, but Jake should not count on an easy death for killing Cariel. The boy smiled. Does the Lord really think that Jake's death guarantees him access to the seed of Yggdrasil? Stillen triumphantly waved a piece of paper in front of the guy's nose and declared that there was a guarantee. It was a goal scroll. It gave the opportunity to take any of the opponent's items after their death. An unpleasant surprise. Where did the Lord get this scroll from? Stillen realized that Jake knew what it was. He smiled triumphantly. And then Jake received a message from the system that Stillen had chosen the seed of Yggdrasil as his target. The item will be obtained after the player dies. At this point, Jake couldn't hold back any longer. How can he use the scroll if he's not even a player? The Lord brazenly replied that items didn't exist just for players. He went on the attack. He had a scimitar in both hands and wielded them skillfully. Jake realized that using the scroll indicated an intention to destroy him without negotiation. The blows rained down on Jake like a hail of blows. He fully felt the full fury of the Lord's onslaught on his own skin. Somewhere behind him, an elf called out. But there was no time to look back. The Lord intensified his attack, and the boy didn't have time to fight back. But Jake was also attacking, and quite noticeably. He saw the Lord grit his teeth, assessing Jake's blows. He realized that the boy was stronger than he seemed. Stillen, however, counted on winning because he was more agile. Jake just smiled as if reading his opponent's thoughts. The Lord was prodding the boy, all the while mocking him to throw him off balance. He said that no matter what equipment he had, the difference between them was still obvious. Jake thought that if he used the equipment at the right moment, the difference could be reduced. He threw a small ball on the floor. Stillen glanced in her direction, not knowing what to expect. Smoke instantly filled the entire space. Smoke bomb! The Lord had an idea, so that's how he defeated Cariel. Jake was retreating at this time. Saying goodbye, he said that it was fun with the Lord, but he was still too strong an opponent. Stillen realized that the smoke was not ordinary, but blinding. He grabbed an infinity orb that was stuffed with dark elf magic. This ball simply absorbed all the smoke, winding it in strands like threads on a ball. When the Lord was able to see something, he was surprised to see no one. Where was the rival? The elf simply noticed the entrance to the dungeon and called Jake. While the Lord was fighting the smoke, the boy slipped in. Stillen rushed after him. But Jake just waved him off, said he didn't like losing battles, and jumped into the abyss. The Lord almost managed to grab the boy, but at the last moment Jake, smiling mockingly, showed him the package, and he sarcastically asked if he had heard anything about a dungeon monopoly. At the same time, the Lord's outstretched hand seemed to slam into an invisible ice wall. The system has issued a warning that a monopoly scroll has been applied to the dungeon. Entry is prohibited to all players and NPCs except the scroll owner and their team. He was thrown away from the passage with terrible force. The Lord was overcome with impotent rage. He must be wrapped around his finger like that. The next message only added fuel to the fire, because Jake and his team declared a monopoly on the dungeon, and the entrance there would be controlled for a week. Stillen was left with a nose and no Yggdrasil seed. It was impudent and humiliating. He wouldn't give that to a damn bastard. Jake couldn't contain his excitement. He imagined the Lord getting angry, especially after he had wasted his scroll. This mental picture was incredibly uplifting. At the same time, the boy was stunned that he had ended up in a dungeon. He had no idea that he would ever get here. A message came that Jake was in the secret dungeon, Cave of the Sleeping Dragon. There were incredible rewards here. If Jake got them, he would even have a chance to defeat Stillen. In the middle of the cave stood an elf. She turned to the boy. There was admiration in his eyes. What a hero Jake is! He dealt with the Lord and found the secret dungeon. How could the elves not have noticed that entrance before? After all, the mine had long been their property. And then it suddenly dawned on her. This dungeon had been Jake's goal from the beginning. And she got in, and now she's in the way. Despair gripped her. Jake was silent, thoughtful. Then he went deeper into the cave. She ran behind him and asked what the exact name of the cave was. The Sleeping Dragon? And is it possible to go there without preparation? Jake explained that the more dangerous the dungeon, the higher the rewards the player receives for clearing it, and they will definitely cope. The elf was trembling. She was scared. Suddenly the boy said that this was not the road to the dragon. It led straight to the monster's nest. That calmed me down. The girl was barely holding on. And here it is, she screamed. Shouldn't we stay away from places like that? He clicked on it, because the last words echoed throughout the dungeon. And that's how you wake everyone up. But it was too late. Hundreds of pairs of eyes lit up in the darkness. Jake excitedly anticipated a fight, so he happily reported that the elf had woken them up with her voice. She had mumbled an apology. Toothy monsters rained down on them from above. Jake greeted them, calling them his future experience points. He knew that these were the main monsters of the dungeon. They were called fractals. They were easy to kill, and they gave a lot of experience. The guy didn't want to miss any, and they scored a lot of points for them. The fight was exciting. Monsters were flying from everywhere. Jake was thrashing them like crazy, destroying dozens at a time. With Jake's gear, the fractals were killing one or two. One of them flew right into the guy's face. Jake grinned at him and slashed with his sword. The dead carcass sagged. But instead of one, 3 came flying in at once. No problem. In an instant, it was all over for them. Jake wanted to kill everyone to level up. And then there was the boss. For dessert. The system notified that the level had been increased. A little further away, an elf was brazenly brandishing her sword next to a collapsed fractal. She couldn't even believe that she had managed to kill someone. True, she had to sweat. But when she saw what Jake was doing, her jaw dropped. Is this even possible? What kind of equipment do you need to have to wet these creatures with packs? And her level is higher. And she also got a level up for killing a monster. On the way to the dragon's lair, she asked Jake how he managed to become so strong. After all, he is only level 113, and she is almost level 160. And that is very strange because he is much stronger. Jake replied that strength does not always depend on level. The elf agreed, but there has to be a limit, right? By the way, about the border, maybe it's worth taking a break and resting a bit? Jake raised his hand, interrupting the girl's verbal flow. He suggested she rest. Here their paths diverged. He would go on alone because there were many traps. The unprepared die there. The elf thought, how did Jake know about the traps? But he said it didn't matter. He told her once again not to follow him, and he disappeared into one of the dark corridors of the cave. The girl sat down comfortably under a stone and decided to wait. Jake confidently walked forward. He knew that there were only 3 paths to the dragon. The middle one was the most dangerous. There were traps at every step. But Jake chose it because here his thoughts were interrupted by some movement far ahead. He stopped, waiting. A moment later, a huge boulder rolled out from the depths of the passage towards us. It was a classic trap. The guy knew how to get around all these tricks. The rock rolled past, but so close that Jake almost got hit. There was a niche in the wall. He remembered it. So he jumped in and pressed himself tightly. Next were the decks. This knowledge also slipped easily into memory. Wasn't this improved memory a consequence of Jake becoming a superhuman player? Indeed, the logs appeared. Heavy, thick. They rolled forward at breakneck speed, threatening to crush anyone who got in their way. The guy's memory immediately gave him the entire algorithm for his next actions. Dodge, jump, niche. The body automatically performed the movements as if Jake had only gone through this yesterday. Euphoria swept over Jake. Everything was going so smoothly. Then he remembered that there must be a brick somewhere nearby. He looked closely and found it. There was a hiding place in the wall, disguised by perfectly fitting bricks, so that if you didn't know, you wouldn't find it. Jake knocked on it, and the brick moved away from the wall. There was a surprise behind her, a legendary ring of good luck. If swallowed, luck increased. It was a bit shocking that you have to eat it, although it can be worse, and the effect of it is eternal. A little disgustedly, Jake placed the ring on his tongue, tuned in, and he swallowed it. True, it took some effort. The candy was not exactly familiar. Then he spat for a long time and shuddered as he remembered how the ring had gotten stuck in his throat, and he almost choked. But the mood was lifted by the news of an increase in luck. That was great. You can't go wrong with luck. Jake decided that since he was the lucky guy now, it was time to try something else. He pulled out a bright yellow capsule. Jake found this elixir while undergoing insanely difficult training. The maturity potion granted an additional skill that was chosen randomly. The conditions for the elixir were now the most favorable. As soon as the boy took it, a notification arrived that the additional skill B-Class Swordmaster had been obtained. What? Swordmaster? Jake read the message carefully again. His face lit up. Go crazy. This is a new passive combat skill. It's the coolest of all possible ones. That's definitely luck at its best. True, the level is too low, but this can be fixed. If you defeat the dungeon boss, there will be a reward. You can level up your skill for the reward, and the reward had to be decent. Since the ring remained the same, the reward for the boss should not have changed. The elf was sitting in the same place where Jake had left her. Suddenly, someone nearby sneezed loudly. She jumped up in fright. But it was Jake. The girl was glad he had returned so quickly. But one thought troubled him. If he was leaving her here, she was more of a burden than a helper. Jake couldn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. The elf spoke passionately, saying that while she was sitting there, she remembered that she hadn't thanked him. After all, Jake had saved everyone from the dark elves. And they really all just got in his way and only raised their own levels at his expense. Jake liked that the girl was soberly assessing the situation. He really only took her because she wouldn't have survived in the mine. The elf assured him that elves remember well. Jake thought it would be nice to have an ally. Increasing the friendliness of other races is not an easy task. Why not ignore such an opportunity? They exchanged contacts. After that, Jake invited her to go to the boss. But the elf was afraid that she would only get confused underfoot. The guy reassured her that everything was fine, but he wouldn't have to come back if she stayed here waiting again. Jake remembered that he wanted to eat some more fruit before the boss fight. But then he decided that he didn't need to. The new skill should help neutralize the damage. When they reached the dragon's lair, the elf could not contain her emotions. The dragon was unreally huge. It was breathtaking. Jake even felt excited. The girl doubted whether Jake would be able to handle it. She offered to be a decoy. But the guy assured her that everything would be fine. He had a tactic. The dragon opened its golden yellow eye and roared, as if it could hear a human. Who dared to wake it? The elf screamed in fear. Jake ordered her not to come forward and boldly stepped towards the danger. The dragon had already risen and was growling terribly when this worthless boy dared to enter his lair. The boy, looking the monster straight in the eye, calmly drew his sword. The dragon appreciated this bravery and stretched its mouth in the shape of a smile. Sparks flashed here and there between its teeth. Jake knew the sparks indicated an attack was coming. He drank a stamina potion just in case and prepared himself. It didn't take long to wait. The dragon's bottomless mouth opened with a fierce roar and spewed out blinding fire that hissed through the air. The cave instantly turned into hell. The elf felt like she had been pushed into a furnace. It was scary to even imagine how hot Jake was. He was at the epicenter of the burning stream. The boy struggled to stay on his feet, but he didn't feel the heat. The potion did its job. Finally, the pressure of the fire eased, and Jake charged. He deliberately rushed into the very center of the flames to see the dragon's weak spot. And he did. The monster was still spitting out remnants of fire mixed with smoke. Jake pushed off the floor with such incredible force that a dent was left in the stone. He jumped as high as he could and aimed at the dragon's chest. He noticed that the boy was still alive and was roaring furiously. And Jake flew in the direction of the single scale that appeared when this creature cooled its throat. That was the weak spot. And now it was right in front of Jake's nose. In a minute, the dragon was lying on the floor. He was wheezing heavily, saying he didn't understand how the boy had learned about the reverse scale, but there would be a high price to pay for it. Jake replied that it was nonsense. The monster simply lost half its health and was stunned for 30 seconds. That's why he was intimidating, because he was scared himself. The dragon was seriously startled. How could this man know? He offered to negotiate. The boy said it was too late to negotiate. He understood that this was just a way to stall for time, but he was not going to give the dragon that. Therefore, I activated the magic casting skill. The magic was applied to the weapon. Also, the magic bonus was added to the damage. Usually, casting magic was learned after level 200, but Jake's was activated through the B-class Swordmaster skill. Additionally, the special effect of the magic sword was activated. The magic power increased it by 200%. This was a unique option. Weapons with magic dealt enormous damage to dragons, demons, and spirits. The dragon had already risen to its feet. It roared that it was not going to die alone. A swordsman like the boy is quite worthy of accompanying a monster to the afterlife. Jake, ignoring the chatter, prepared to deliver the decisive blow. He wondered if the boss on the 11th floor would be able to withstand him. The monster rushed forward, but Jake said he was late. Following this was the blow that Jake had been preparing for so long and had been building up its strength. He simply tore the dragon to shreds and scattered them all over the cave. The boss of the hidden dungeon has been destroyed. The system has confirmed this. All that's left of him is his head, spine, and tail. Jake was waiting for the rewards, and they were not long in coming. The level was significantly increased. Awarded the legendary title Ancient Dragon Slayer, obtained the Essence of Power, a legendary item, the Fruit of Evolution, and rare heroic equipment. The elf hurried to greet him. She kept shouting praises, annoying Jake. But suddenly she almost fainted when she saw that she had obtained the title of Dragon Slayer and had increased her level. Jake explained that everyone on the team gets something and congratulated them on their achievements. The elf asked what he got, and Jake went back to studying the awards. The title received increased the characteristics by 5%, and Jake already had 8 titles in total. It was the turn of the Essence of Power. The guy drank it and received a permanent increase in his strength parameter by 15 units. There was one last thing left, but then Jake saw that the elf was not taking her eyes off him. And what was she looking at so intently? It turned out that the portal had already opened. She wanted to find out if Jake would be coming out of the dungeon. However, the boy did not want to rush. He had to prepare properly. The probability that dark elves would be waiting for them at the exit was too high. The last and main achievement was the Fruit of Evolution. It's incredible. When used, it increased the rank of one skill or stat and also permanently increased all stat by 10 points. But could it be swallowed? How edible was it? Jake aimed for the evolution of swordsmanship. While he was gathering his courage to eat the fruit, he thought it would be nice if a rank 5 fell out. After using the Ring of Luck, he didn't think it was particularly impudent. Then he resolutely stuffed the strange fruit into his mouth. It turned out that the fears were in vain. Although the fruit looked suspicious, it tasted normal. The system signaled that he had used the Fruit of Evolution, and now he had to choose a characteristic. Jake took the art of the sword. The system must have had a sense of humor because it reported that a huge success had befallen the player, and that the sword-wielding characteristic was evolving. Then there was a pause. The ranking was being determined. A little later, the system reported that the sword art was B class, and the swordsmanship was SSS class. Jake froze in shock, and a moment later his happily stunned scream broke the underground silence. Meanwhile, in the mine, Lord Stillen and his men waited. The Lord was impatiently watching for signs of his arrival. His men reminded him not to rush, as the boy had a week and would bide his time until the last moment. Stillen agreed that the guy was too cunning. Who would have guessed that he had exclusive access to the dungeon? The Dark Elves were convincing the Lord to stay out of the Light Elves' territory for now. Their rangers could appear at any moment. The Lord understood all this, but he did not want to leave his post. Instead, he suggested calling for reinforcements, although he knew that by doing so he risked provoking a full-scale war. Nothing will stop him. War is war. The decision has been made, and if something is going to happen, it will have to be accepted. But the seed of Yggdrasil is the most important thing. The elves could not argue with their commander. They settled down comfortably and prepared for a long wait. But soon they heard a noise and commotion. Someone loudly complained that this was a real hole and wilderness. Everyone turned their heads in that direction, ready for battle. However, a dark-haired boy with horns on his head emerged from the portal. He whimsically declared that everyone here had become too relaxed. He ordered the Yggdrasil seed to be obtained. Where is it? It was Pierre Demon himself. The Lord, through gritted teeth, barely restraining himself, said that the matter was too serious. It might even happen that a war would break out. The demon was amused by this. He doesn't know. But he gave the order. Even if he has to destroy all the bright ones, don't give a damn. He is only interested in Yggdrasil. Stillen noted that the forces of light and dark are equal. It is not yet known who will win. The demon said that he should not have refused his help. One of the warriors sharply and nervously objected that they had their own methods and didn't need help. But who could guarantee them victory? The demon shot a brief, angry glance at the warrior. He gasped, twisted as if he had been hit in the gut, and fell face down. The demon sternly pointed a finger at him and ordered him not to dare raise his voice at him. Has everyone forgotten that the life of the Elf Queen is in his hands? His eyes burned ominously, and Pierre Demon himself seemed to be covered in a black cobweb. The elven warrior trembled in terror. The Lord stopped the demon with a sharp cry. He regained his respectable appearance and agreed to spare the warrior's life this time, but he noted that this was the last and only warning. The warrior sighed with visible relief. The demon continued to instruct Stillen. The Lord must stop being arrogant. The only thing he needs to do is get the seed of Yggdrasil and exchange it for their queen. Stillen asked if Pierre would keep his word and definitely free the queen if they captured Yggdrasil. He assured me that he would keep his promise. After all, that was the essence of the contract with the demon, and it disappeared. Only the bright spot of the portal reminded him for a while that it wasn't a hallucination. The Lord swore angrily that as soon as he saved the queen, he would immediately cut the bastard's throat. The warriors asked what the orders would be. Stillen mentally asked his queen for help in deciding the fate of the tribe. Then he said firmly that since the queen was in the hands of the demons, they had no choice. They would have to obey. He ordered reinforcements to be called and Yggdrasil to be captured. Then he assured them that this humiliating situation would not last long. They would soon get even with the demons. The Lord clenched his fists resolutely and mentally swore that he would definitely pay back the horned man for such humiliation. Suddenly the dungeon portal activated. Everyone fell silent in alarm. Jake and the elf appeared from there. The ambush was no surprise to the boy. The Lord's eyes widened because the aura of both of them was completely different from what it had been recently. It had completely changed. Jake surveyed his opponents. Judging by their unharmed appearance, there had been no clash with the Light Elves. Stillen was still trying to understand what had changed in the boy. Had he received some kind of blessing? He asked aloud what they were doing in that dungeon. Jake brazenly declared that this information was valuable. Why should he give it to the Lord so foolishly? Stillen shouted angrily that the boy would soon regret his impudence. that he would be begging for mercy, washing himself with tears. As he took out his scimitars, he reasoned that the guy's level was no higher than 200. Besides, the scroll's effect was still valid. He needed to kill him quickly and take the seed. The elf rushed towards Jake in fright, but he stopped her and ordered her to move as far away as possible. He himself prepared to accept the fight. The Lord charged forward like a wild bull, and he suggested trying to catch up with him. Jake looked around, confused. Laura was nowhere to be seen. Even the elf didn't have time to follow where he had gone. But then she realized and warned Jake that the Lord was using stealth when he moved. Stillin raced again. He was furious that he had to waste time on a low-level opponent. But he had to kill this brat. With his super speed, he wanted to wear Jake out and knock him down, so that the guy wouldn't find him in the dungeon, and he wouldn't be able to catch up with the Lord. Jake really couldn't keep track of the enemy's movements. The speed was so fast that his eyes couldn't keep up, but he had the power of wielding a sword. And he decided to demonstrate it. Stillin kept circling and grinning maliciously at the thought that the moment the boy saw him would be the last in his life. Jake was intently preparing for the attack. He watched intently as the air swirled around him. The Lord decided to attack from behind without being noticed. But just as he was about to strike, Jake suddenly turned and swung his sword. The Lord fell to the ground. The elf girl applauded enthusiastically. The warriors frankly did not understand how the boy was able to stop the commander. Stillin didn't understand anything either. How had the boy been able to track him? Jake explained that he knew all of the Lord's attack patterns. It was just an attack from behind after a quick move. Stillin exploded. So he will defeat the boy by force and cut him in half along with the sword. But Jake's sword, exposed to block the blow, held firm in defense and did not yield. Only other energy could block the sword's energy. Stillin was furious. Well, no one below level 200 can stop him. And why wasn't his sword with enhanced energy working? He redoubled his efforts. But in vain. Jake's patience snapped. He said he didn't want to fight by the Lord's rules and delivered a tangible blow. Stillin staggered and fell. The boy leaned over his lying opponent and raised his sword above his head for a good swing. The Lord barely had time to defend himself. The weapons crossed. Damn, how can this player with a level below 200 use the energy of the sword? And then it happened. He gained weapon skills in the dungeon. Jake didn't object, but he increased the pressure, forcing the Lord to lower himself. And then Stillin's scimitar suddenly broke and broke. The warriors realized that it was time to run for help. The elf shouted to Jake to be careful. The guy glanced back for a split second. At the same time, he threw Stillin away with a short, powerful blow. Elven warriors were approaching from behind. The Lord screamed for them to back off, as their characteristics were far inferior to Jake's. But Jake had already met them. The fight was short. The warriors scattered and, having punched holes in the rock with their own heads, disappeared into the depths of the mine. Stillin saw that Jake counterattacked with the butt of his sword, and that was evidence of a remarkable level. But even a scimitar couldn't withstand the powerful energy of the sword. It's clear that the guy has skills of at least rank 5. It was then that the Lord began to doubt his own strength. He looked at his broken weapon, and then he raised his hands in a gesture of unequivocal surrender. Stillin admitted defeat. Jake stared at his enemy in disbelief. Warriors poked their heads out from the cliff. They shouted in unison that the elder should never surrender, because losing to a man is a shame. The Lord growled at them. Don't they understand that the boy spared them during the counterattack? He could have killed them. They bowed their heads in shame. Then Stillin turned to Jake. He assured him that they would not attack again, and he asked that the boy kill him and be satisfied with his death, and let the warriors go. Jake, of course, had hoped to reach an agreement. But Stillin's nobility had struck him. He had admitted defeat as soon as he felt himself losing in swordplay. But Jake didn't want to kill. The Dark Elves had high authority in the Alliance, and it's not worth being at enmity with the Alliance. Jake addressed the elf by name for the first time. It was interesting what Miss May thought about the defeat of the Dark Ones. She replied that Jake should do as he pleased, and the boy told the Lord that he would not make any claims on the condition that he would apologize to the nobles. Stillin humbly agreed. Now it's time to find out. Why are the Dark Ones at war with the Light Ones? Why do they need the seeds of Yggdrasil? And why did the Lord, the Elder of the Dark Ones, act personally? Suddenly Stillin fell to his knees and begged for the seed. In exchange, he promised everything the Dark Elves possessed. Jake was confused. The Lord was clearly in despair. Otherwise, why was there a point in attacking fiercely first and then begging? The boy wanted to hear the truth. Why did they need those seeds so much? The Lord closed his eyes, tensed, and Jake got a notification that he had a message from Stillin. In it, the Lord reported that their queen had been taken hostage by demons. The guy definitely didn't expect this. He started to say something, but the Lord stopped him. The topic is very delicate. It's better not to discuss it out loud. Messages are more reliable. Jake sent a question asking where the queen was. He received a reply that she was in her own home, but the demons were carefully guarding her. Gosh, what a twist! It turns out that even dark elves can't stand up to demons, Stillin continued. The demons promised to exchange the queen for the seed of the Tree of Peace. That is why they had to go to extremes. Jake didn't understand where the demons came from at the lower levels, but suddenly an idea came to him. If he defeated the demons, he could gain a significant achievement. Madame Audrey took the coveted Yggdrasil seed from Jake's hands. She held it high above her head. The elf women looked at her in awe, their heads raised. The boy watched. And all this for the sake of one seed? It was a good thing they didn't know about the other 6 he still had. After resting a little, Jake decided that he needed to prepare for his next adventures. He had to say goodbye to the elves. He went through his inventory. I decided to put on the sacred mantle. It disrupted the balance of all items, which confused even experienced players. It also increased attacks against dark enemies by 250%. It had a high-level cap, but in this case the guy had a rainbow sticker. Jake had a bunch of other items, but the extra 250% damage to dark energy was what he needed most right now. All the demons he planned to fight had dark energy. Jake was called by Audrey. She apologized for neglecting her guest during the festivities and invited him to the town to celebrate the return of the Tree of Peace. The guy thanked him for the invitation but declined, citing an urgent matter that had just suddenly arisen. May ran up. She was afraid she would never see him again. However, he promised to return after completing the task. Audrey, looking at him thoughtfully, said that she only now realized that it was thanks to Jake that May and the others remained alive, and they just let him into the mine. Jake understood that this was the result of increasing intimacy. They all wanted to give the boy a gift and were grateful to him. So Audrey promised the boy that from now on the elves would be his strength, which would always come to his aid, because they were in his debt. Jake replied that since it was like that, he would like to ask a favor. Couldn't the Light Ones stop fighting the Dark Ones for a while? Because his target right now is the Dark Elves' territory. Audrey happily promised. It wasn't difficult, as the Dark Ones had recently retreated from the mines themselves. May asked incredulously if she understood correctly. Jake was going to meet Stillin? But it was dangerous there alone. She could go with him. The guy politely refused, explaining that he was more comfortable alone, and he didn't plan on fighting them. He will be a third party, a mediator. Although it is strange, because he is a human being. Finally, Audrey promised once again that if the Dark Ones attacked, the Light Ones would only defend themselves. She also regretted that she had been prejudiced against people. The boy thanked him sincerely. He knew that such a decision was not easy for the elves, but Audrey calmed him down. Everyone respected the benefactor's request. Jake looked back at the girls one more time, waved to them, and left. The guy was in a hurry because he understood that Stillin was waiting for him impatiently. He sent a message to the Lord that he had already set out and asked him to send a guide. The dark elves lived in a dark forest. It was a gloomy place. No sun, no light. It seemed that there was not a single living soul there. Thick fog hid the paths and muffled footsteps. Jake moved through the forest following the guide. Without him, he would never have found the way and would have gotten lost. The boy tried to guess whether this fog was real or whether it had been created artificially to hide the elf settlement from prying eyes. It seemed that the fog even hid time, for it was unclear how many hours they had spent on the journey. Then Stillen came forward to meet them. He greeted Jake and said that the settlement was nearby. The boy inquired about the situation and expressed the hope that the demons had not learned of his visit. The Lord replied that all safety measures had been taken. After all, the Queen's life depended on it. He was nervous whether Jake would cope. There were 2 demons, but they were very strong. The boy didn't deny that the demons were serious opponents, but he had a plan. So he smiled reassuringly at the elf and advised him to trust him. On the way, Jake said that there was no need to be nervous. After all, the Lord had already risked his life for the seed. He explained that he wanted to buy time and save the Queen. Stillen reasoned further that it would be better to take on 1 demon at a time, but he was not allowed out of the settlement, and Jake's abilities were definitely enough for 1 demon. But 2 was too many. The probability of a miscarriage was too high. That's why he was worried, because all he had left to do was to trust the guy completely. Jake appreciated the candor, but Stillen was sure that Jake had not shown him all his skills. The boy laughed and praised his vigilance. They separated before settling in. The Lord didn't want to be caught by the guards. As he said goodbye, he asked the boy to take care of the Queen. Jake promised. The Queen's residence in the settlement was located at the foot of a cliff. The cliff served as protection for the house from almost all sides. The Queen was sleeping in her chambers. The demons were consulting in the next room. They sensed the presence of a man who had suddenly appeared in the center of the town. Pierre assumed it was the same boy. Shira, a level 194 demon, asked which one, the one with the seed? Pierre nodded. It was unclear how he got here. But there were only 2 options. Either the Dark Elves had lost, or they had betrayed. Shira doubted that it was betrayal. She thought the Queen as a hostage was a strong argument. Pierre was going to go out to the boy, but the demon wanted to do it herself. She said that she had not felt a human spirit for a long time, and that her appetite had awakened. Pierre remained to guard the Queen. He asked not to kill him right away, but to check if the guy had any semen. Shira laughed, saying that murder was her specialty, so she didn't need to be taught. And she disappeared. The demon remained at the window to watch. Meanwhile, Jake was walking freely around town and couldn't understand why no one was reacting to him. He wasn't hiding. The Apple effect wasn't working. As if in response to his thoughts, a figure began to appear out of thin air ahead. It was definitely one of the demons. The boy stopped, firmly planted on his feet, and waited. The demon saw the boy's pitiful aura. Why was he so self-confident? She suggested that he give up the seed and commit suicide. Otherwise, he would become her slave. Jake boldly declared that the arrogant arrogance of demons was the same everywhere. As in the game, so here. Shira didn't like being teased. Her smile faded. Anger began to rise, and Jake asked how he should thank her for coming so close. While the demoness was trying to figure out what was going on, the boy activated the trap. Chains fell on Shira out of nowhere. They encompassed, twisted, and tangled. She writhed and screamed, but the forces were unequal. In a moment, the chains brought the demoness to her knees and pinned her firmly to the ground. Becoming wild, Shira hissed with rage, cursing and cursing, unable to find the words. Jake said she looked like a high-level idiot, and he explained that this was a curse of eternal shackles of mythical rank. Only the Demon King could destroy it. The demon was furious and cursed. Jake agreed that the devil would be appropriate now, and he summoned Paranet. He appeared, as always, spectacularly. Shira called Pierre for help, but he was in no hurry. He was guarding the Queen. Jake asked Paranet to wait a bit until the boy raised his level. Taking out his sword, he raised it to Shira's face. She howled in fear. Jake was completely consumed by her suffering. He swung his sword and slit her throat, wasting no time for sentimentality. In the end, the demoness only had time to regret that her death had turned out to be so senseless. But Jake reassured her, promising to send a friend to the company soon. The demoness did not hear the last words, because the fire of the chains completely burned her to ashes. And the wind spread the ashes throughout the settlement. The system came to life, reporting a level increase. That the ability to deal damage to demons has increased by 15%. Jake was also awarded a legendary item of his choice, plus the title Demon Hunter, and also Demon Essence. Paranet's level also increased. He didn't expect anything else from his master. Even the most terrifying demons fell with one blow from his master. Jake looked at the skeleton's stats. The results were pleasing. Level 162, and all stats had increased incredibly. The guy nodded in satisfaction. It was not for nothing that he invested in such an expensive item. Suddenly there was a rustling sound behind him. It was Pierre, squatting down, picking through the still-cold ashes. He asked in a muffled voice how Jake had killed Shira. The guy looked at the demon and assessed the situation. Pierre's brief glance suddenly threw the boy back with such force that the wind whistled in his ears. Jake braked with his feet to stop. He realized that this boy was the one in charge, but he didn't understand how he had managed to appear so silently. He said out loud that Shira had died easily from a single blow with his sword. Pierre, without turning his head, calmly repeated the question again. But Jake saw his aura turn bloody with bright red flaming spots. It was bloodlust. Suddenly, Paranet rushed towards the demon. He shouted that his master could knock down such stupid demons with one left. But this time Paranet wants to figure it out himself. So let the demon prepare and tremble. The boy noticed that the skeleton's survival instinct had gone somewhere. Why the hell had he become so self-assured? Was it Jake's achievements that had affected him so much? The demon, not paying attention to anything, said that he would kill the boy easily if he answered the question. But if he didn't want to be kind, then he would have to suffer for a long time. Paranet was approaching. He roared that enough was enough and swung his sword, preparing to destroy the enemy. Then the demon flashed his eye and sent Paranet into a long flight. Jake was rushing to help when something flashed past him at breakneck speed with a scream. The flight was delayed by one of the rocks that tightly surrounded the elf settlement. What a force! Paranet was knocked out with one punch. Would his defense be insufficient even with his equipment? After all, his opponent's level was more than 100 times higher than his own. Pierre slammed his sword on the floor and shouted at Jake to stop. He knew that he would be punished for the death of the demoness. However, he hoped to receive a discount for the boy's head. In addition, the demon hoped to find out how he managed to kill Shira. Jake studied his opponent. He held a thin, long sword. Swords are good. Jake relied on his SSS rank swordsmanship. The demon struck the first blow. The guy easily beat him off. This encouraged him. If he could react, everything would be fine. The demon frowned. He didn't expect Jake to be able to block the attack. He's only human, and his level was nowhere near 100. Jake sneered, provoking Pierre. Is that all the great demon is capable of? Well, not at all impressive. The demon could not stand mockery. It was insulting, and he was not going to tolerate it. He attacked fiercely and powerfully, but Jake easily intercepted all the blows. Swords clashed and bounced with a clang, and then the demon screamed and retreated. The boy not only fought back as if playing, but he also managed to attack. He aimed straight for the neck. It's a good thing Pierre had time to put his hand up, otherwise he would have been headless. Jake, his sword carelessly slung over his shoulder, strolled nearby. The demon looked at his severed hand and wondered what kind of creature this guy was. He surpassed the demon in swordsmanship, and he probably hadn't shown his full strength yet. Meanwhile, the hand gradually recovered thanks to the regeneration skill. How to deal with the man? He turned out to be more dangerous than he first seemed, and his attack power clearly doesn't match his level. But Pierre had an advantage in strength and agility. That's what he'll use. Jake was tired of waiting. He called the demon, mockingly saying that it was enough to regenerate. It would be the same now anyway. Pierre laughed sarcastically. Skills alone don't determine the outcome of a battle, and now he'll prove it. Quickly jumping towards Jake, he again encountered strong resistance. The demon hissed that he himself could regenerate, and for the boy, Any blow could be the last. This irritated Jake, and with a jerk he knocked out his opponent's sword. It flew high into the air, twisting wildly, and crashed into the ground far beyond the scene of the clash. And the boy, leaning towards the enemy, almost whispered that he knew the demon's weaknesses. For example, if you pierce their heart, regeneration will slow down significantly. At that, Jake felt something behind his shoulder and squeezed it tightly. The demon, in the same way, almost intimately, clarified whether he had said that the outcome of the battle depended not only on the mastery of the sword. And he shone his red eye at Jake. The boy recoiled in fear, expecting the same attack. Cold purple flames engulfed the opponents. Fiery discharges darted between them. Black wisps of smoke snaked and wrapped around both of them. Jake cried out in pain. The demon laughed. It was black lightning. It dealt damage equal to the total damage of its wielder. The flames grew stronger and larger, and then exploded into a bright, blinding ball of fire. She swept through the town, sweeping away everything in her path. A pungent blue fog swirled above the epicenter of the explosion. The demon was celebrating his victory. His eyes were shining with delight. He was shouting to Jake that he who loses his guard always dies. But the boy could hardly hear anything. His eyes rolled, his legs were bent, and what came out of his throat was no longer a scream, but a barely audible moan. Pierre decided that he had lost consciousness and decided to finish him off. But before he could reach out to Jake, something incomprehensible flew into his face. The demon jumped back in surprise, covering himself with his hand. Then I looked closer and realized it was a doll amulet. It was sometimes used in battles. The doll took the damage, and if the damage was fatal, they would switch places with the player, and it would break the enemy's spirit. Jake rose from behind the demon's shoulder, but Pierre didn't see him. He stood there, mindless and motionless. Then Jake shouted with all his might that the demon was finished. He brought his sword down on the head of the petrified Pierre with incredible force, but the sword bounced back with a clang. The demon seemed to be covered with an impenetrable cap. Did he really use a protective barrier? How did he do it? After all his magical power should have been exhausted. And if he manages to attack again like he did last time, it could end badly. We need to finish him off quickly. Jake picked up speed and raced, ready to crush any defense. But suddenly a sharp cry ordered him to stop. The guy had to brake sharply halfway. A crowd gathered not far from the battle site. They were dark elves. It seems that Stillen has completed his task and freed everyone. Separate from the rest, closer to Jake, stood the Lord and Queen. And then Jake had a sudden realization. It was Stillen who had put the cap on the demon. Meanwhile, Pierre had almost recovered. He was smiling predatorily at the Lord. It turns out that it was Stillen who brought the boy. Let him await retribution for his betrayal. The Lord silently looked at the demon with hatred. Jake didn't understand the situation. Why had Stillen stopped the fight? The guy wanted to deal with the demon. That was his task, the one they had agreed on. The Queen answered this question. She said that a demon cannot be killed. Their lives are intertwined. If the demon dies, so does she. Stillen grimly confirmed her words. The Queen is under a curse. It was activated as soon as she woke up. The dark elves whispered in fear. They began to ask questions. What did this mean? Was the Queen still in danger? Jake looked thoughtfully into the distance. It seemed to him that Stillen was hiding something, that he had not told everything. The demon, now fully restored, beamed and gloated. He still hadn't lost. What could the boy do to him now? He ordered the dark elves to capture Jake if they did not want their queen to die. Stillen rushed towards the demon. This turn of events came as a surprise to him, and quite unpleasant. The demon continued to joke. He wrung his hands grotesquely. How scared he was. Now his heart would just stop from terror. Meanwhile, the demon was waiting. He needed to restore his magical powers. Then he could get even with the boy. Jake shouted to Stillen to turn on his brains. We need to catch the demon. While he is without magical power, he is just a walking bag of shit that you can't be afraid of. The Lord hesitantly moved towards the demon. The demon screamed for the Lord to stay away. He threatened that even without magical power he would tear his own heart out with his own hands for the death of their queen. Stillin stopped. Jake knew it was too late. Even if the demon was bluffing, the Lord still wouldn't take the risk. Only the queen could have the final say here. How would she act? Pierre screamed hysterically for the elves to stop standing there and grab the boy right now. Did they really care about the queen's life? And then the queen finally spoke. She ordered everyone to stay in their places. You can't grab someone who came to their aid in their time of need. You can't listen to a demon. Stillin tried to object, but changed his mind. The demon continued. Why listen to her? She is in danger, and therefore inadequate. The decision must be made by her entourage. You were ready to fight the Light Ones. What do you care about that one guy? The queen sharply and demandingly asked Stillin if it was true about the war with the Light Elves. He lowered his eyes guiltily. The demon was confused. Jake could see that the queen really knew nothing about the conflict, and she was seriously angry. She stamped her foot forcefully. This is unbelievable! How could they dare to do such a stupid thing? Didn't they understand that the demons wouldn't keep their promise? The Lord made excuses. They had no choice because the queen was in danger. She blamed herself. All this happened because she fell asleep. The Lord asked her not to be punished. The queen firmly declared that she would fix everything right now. If anyone persecuted the light, she would kill herself to maintain trust. The demon knew he had a problem. They had put the queen to sleep on purpose so she wouldn't interfere. It was time to escape. He couldn't teleport, but his wings were about to recover. Jake spoke up. He said he figured out how to lift the curse. The queen closed her eyes wearily, and then condescendingly began to explain that the curse was not so easy to lift, because it was of a higher level. Suddenly, Stillin suggested that perhaps Jake had the elixir. An adventurer like that probably could have it. The boy had the elixir, but it was too expensive to spend on a curse, so the elves didn't need to know about it. But there was something different. He handed the Lord a glass of potion. He looked at him in disbelief. Pierre rolled with laughter. He had put the curse on himself, and he was no ordinary man, but a demon. They were going to remove him with some stinking potion. Jake ordered the demon to shut up, stand still, and prepare to die. Stillin finally realized what he had gotten. It was a legendary ranked sacred antidote. It removed all curses of all ranks. The Lord beamed with relief. Now the queen would definitely be saved. The queen bowed to Jake and asked for forgiveness for the evil her people had done while she slept. The boy replied that it would be better to apologize to the Light Elves. The queen nodded. They would certainly do so. But they would now honor Jake as their benefactor. Stillin agreed with the queen's decision. The boy reminded them of their agreement. He needed some rare grass that only grows in these parts. The queen assured her that there would be no problem with Dola's herb. Then she took the bottle of the potion. The demon rushed towards her and shouted at her not to drink. It still wouldn't break the curse. Stillin crept up behind Pierre and quietly ordered him not to move. The Lord realized that the queen was right. This demon had no intention of committing suicide. It was blackmail. The queen calmly swallowed the contents of the bottle. No one else bothered her. The potion worked immediately. She physically felt the curse lift, like shackles, and the world around her began to seem brighter. For a moment, all attention was focused on the queen. So the demon decided to take the chance to escape. Just in time, his magical power was restored. He flapped his newly restored wings, soared upward, and shouted goodbye to the boy that he would definitely take revenge. Pierre was already high in the sky when a red ray pierced him through and through. The wings flew off in different directions, and the demon himself flew upside down. The queen wasn't going to let him go so easily. The demon slammed into the ground, raising columns of dust. When he cleared his throat and opened his eyes, he saw Jake standing before him. He looked intently at Pierre, and then he said that he would die here and now. The sword flashed in the sun. The demon screamed in despair. He didn't believe this was the end, but Jake was determined to kill. A short movement of the hand, and the demon was finished. The system reported leveling up and receiving rewards, demon essence and lower demon horn. The next morning, Jake greeted me in a big, comfortable bed. The guy was finally able to get some rest. When he woke up, he decided to sum up his adventures. I started with a reward that looked like a silver ball. It was given to Jake by the Queen. He could never have imagined that he would one day have such a treasure. And it all started with Jake getting ready to go. He got Dala's herb and said goodbye to the elves. He reminded Stelena not to forget to ask forgiveness from the Bright Ones. The Queen regretfully said that she wanted to treat the boy to dinner, and that she was sorry that he was leaving them so quickly. Jake politely replied that he was sorry too, but he couldn't stay because he had a lot of things to do. The Queen thought for a moment. She wanted to thank the boy, but nothing appropriate came to mind. And suddenly, she had an idea. She searched in her pockets and took out a red box. She handed it to Jake, explaining that Dala's grass wasn't enough for her life saved. She asked him to accept this as well, even though it wasn't a high enough reward. Thinking back, Jake wondered why the Queen thought it was a modest gift. It was far from it. The prize was valuable. Then he swallowed it. The system notified him that a seasoned pill had been used. He gains the elevated senses talent. Great! It worked! Heightened senses are one of the best passive combat abilities. Jake leaned back on the bed and kicked his arms and legs with an excess of joyful emotions. Later, he relaxedly reflected that it was all thanks to the Ring of Luck. It really does throw up the best options in gacha moments like this. In addition to the items, Jake received a much higher reward. The highest reputation with both light and dark elves at the same time is almost impossible, but he managed to do it. Then he remembered the battle with Pierre. It was really dangerous then. He was on the verge of death. If I hadn't taken the precaution of using a doll as a charm, the ending probably wouldn't have been so joyful. If only he could use all the items in his inventory. Then he would definitely become invincible. By the way, it would be a good idea to put things in order there. And Jake began to look through his things. Some of them he barely remembered. During this lesson, Jake realized that you can't click on the inventory with your hands, which was quite inconvenient in the game. It was enough to simply think about the subject. He started training. He thought about the inventory. He got a window with the inventory. I thought about higher potions or antidotes. They appeared on the screen. Controlling your mind turned out to be convenient and interesting. In the same way, you could mentally put on, take off, or change equipment. Then it was the turn of the blue royal dola grass. This secret item could only be obtained by maximizing your friendship with the dark elves. Jake had a better result and not just a friendship boost. For saving the Queen's life, he received a whole box of Dala's herb. In the far corner of the inventory, Jake noticed a dusty stone of omnipotence. On its own, this stone was ordinary, but when combined with Dala grass, it turned into a valuable rare item. The system clarified whether Jake really wanted to activate the omnipotence stone. Of course he wanted to. The system suggested confirming the use of Dala grass as a catalyst. Jake agreed. The screen lit up with a bright light. The flashes of this light were blinding. The union had taken place. Jake now had a mythic-ranked omnipotence stone. If it was absorbed by a weapon, various effects were added to the weapon's stats. Taking his sword, the boy decided to add a stone to it. Of course, a level 500 weapon would be better, but this sword also proved itself quite well. The secret of using the stone was known only to a few experienced players. One of them was Jake. He cast a spell over the screen, then confirmed that he wanted to use the power stone on the magic sword Bazur, and the sword swallowed the stone. For some reason, at that moment, Jake remembered his friends. He wondered where they were now. Are they still alive? At this very time, in the residential complex of a high-level guild, its leader was in his office with a girl. He was showing her a viral video. A pretty girl with unruly red hair asked if this was the same guy who had emerged from the ancient ruins. The girl was Empress Naomi. The head of the guild confirmed that this is the guy in question. He's a newcomer, but he's promising. We need to take a closer look. After all, we need to understand whether we can bet on him. Naomi watched the video and nodded thoughtfully, agreeing with the leader. Suddenly, she asked to stop the video. She was interested in the guy's equipment. Is this a Fury protective gear set? During the active play period, this premium set was the most popular. But she hadn't seen anyone in such a set lately. The newcomer had something that was impossible to get even with a huge desire. But why is it still at such low levels? The guild leader asked if she understood anything. Naomi replied that all the players of the Game of Gods, including herself, were called into this world 5 years ago. And it's not even worth thinking that someone 5 years old could wander the lower floors. Because it's impossible. He's wearing a rage set. Naomi had never seen such equipment in this world. Most likely the guy received it as a reward for going through the ruins. The head added that the guy was supposedly already on the 15th floor. And this is a record move, Naomi exclaimed in delight. Is this true? Is this possible? Even top players couldn't get through the floors that fast. And she couldn't even get through the lower floors that fast. The guild leader said that they had to act before someone intercepted him. It would be a good idea to establish the boy's identity, Naomi thought. The faces of those who started with her have long been known. Those who were destined to die are dead. Those who were lucky enough to survive have become rankers. But there are still those who haven't been found. And then she guessed. Freestyler? Of course it's him! The guild leader stared at her in disbelief. But this is just an urban legend. Naomi countered that the Frida player is not a legend, but quite real, and for him such a passage of floors is as easy as eating cold porridge. The head replied that until recently Naomi thought he had died in training. Of course. If he were alive, he would have already passed everyone. This rookie can't be a free play man. But somewhere deep down, Naomi hoped he was alive. With him, the game would be much more interesting. Naomi was a girl with the in-game nickname Fluffy Pink Rabbit. The sounds of a fierce fight echo among the jagged rocks. Jake's sword cuts through the air with a whistle. The blows rain down like hail on the dragon-like monster, giving it no chance to dodge. He dies. A final roar escapes from his mouth. The system issues a message that the hunt for the dragonoid in the wasteland has been successfully completed. The level has been increased. The dragonoid lies dead at Jake's feet. The guy is pleased with the result. After upgrading the weapon, the sword can now easily handle even high-level monsters. Jake is sure that now enemies below level 300 are not scary to him. All this is thanks to the improved characteristics. The sword Bazur already had excellent performance, and now his magical power received a plus of 200%, and the Stone of Omnipotence added 5% to his characteristics, 25 magical power, and increased the power of his skills by 70%. That's quite a weapon. The boy looked at his sword with admiration, admiring it. Suddenly, a message came from Stillen. He asked if Jake was well prepared. The guy didn't understand what he was talking about, and asked the Lord what he meant. He reminded him that Jake was going to participate in an interracial tournament. Exactly, and he had almost forgotten about it. The tournament was to take place on the 15th level of the Infinity Tower. Arriving there, Jake wandered the corridors and remembered that Stillen, with whom they had kept in touch, had once told him about an interracial tournament. It was held regularly. It was a grand event. Jake was interested in the tournament. There was nothing like it in the game. What is its level of difficulty? The level of participants was 300 and below. This fighting festival was held to identify talented fighters, and for the guy it was a great opportunity to evaluate his strength. Meanwhile, Jake reached the palace. He had seen them often in the game, but this was the first time in this world. It was interesting to watch the audience, which kept coming and coming. There were representatives of different races. In one corner, bearded dwarves were chatting. And there were even orcs. These killing machines with incredibly huge muscles and terrifying faces. Of course, there were people too. A large crowd had gathered. The races tried to keep together. Stillen said that people didn't really die here. If you got killed, you were simply eliminated from the tournament. Maybe that's why so many people gathered. Jake kept himself apart from everyone, and he felt the eyes on him. They were watching him. They were whispering about him. Is this the same player? It looks like it's the same one. He's wearing the same gear as in the video. At the other end of the hall, they could hear Jake's armor being discussed. This armor has great characteristics? Not only that, it also looks badass. If you sell it, you can change your fate. And what guild will this guy join? Jake heard it all. His keen senses allowed him to pick up even whispers. He hadn't expected so many people to know about him. He didn't like this excessive attention to himself, but he had no choice. He had to accept it. If you proved yourself in the tournament, your fame spread throughout the tower. And Jake wasn't going to lose to anyone below level 300. So you had to get used to the fame. The system announced that an interracial tournament was about to begin. The large screen under the ceiling of the hall also issued a message to prepare for battle. Jake realized that the time had come, walked to the center of the hall, and stepped into the portal. He was teleported. Where? At first, the boy was completely confused by the surprise. He found himself in a metropolis, high-rise buildings, streams of cars. The place seemed familiar. Jake looked around a bit and was amazed. Yes, it was Seoul. Other tournament participants nearby were also stunned to realize they were in Seoul. One player noticed that there were no people anywhere. So this space was created artificially. And is there anyone among the players who has previously participated in an interracial tournament? There was one, a dark-haired guy with round glasses. He raised his hand and said he had participated once. He explained to the others that they were in a virtual space. The tournament arena is different every time. Last time it was a glacial zone. Jake listened, looked around, and analyzed. There were many more people in the tower. There were about 50 people there now. It seemed that the rest had scattered. The system signaled that the first group task would begin soon. The task itself immediately appeared. The essence was to destroy a detachment of Chinese vampires numbering 500 people. Special rewards were promised for the destruction. All participants also carefully studied the message. Someone clarified what kind of monsters these are. Do they even exist? The experienced guy said that this was a normal hunting task. They were lucky, because hunting tasks are the easiest. In the last tournament, the task was a maze. One girl began to wonder if a team of 50 people could destroy 500 people. The glasses man smiled indulgently and explained that the system does not give impossible tasks. Then he turned to Jake, somewhat condescendingly calling him a celebrity. He ordered them to follow his instructions. Because in group quests, the main thing is team cooperation. Even if you have good equipment, if you are surrounded by enemies, it means death. Jake agreed out loud, but mentally noted that this guy was clearly trying to hold him back. The team stood in the middle of the street, listening to the instructions of the bespectacled man. No one noticed that they were being watched from above, from the roof of the nearest house. There were dwarves standing there. They had been added to the humans because there were too few of them for the team. However, they were in no hurry to join the group. Here, Chinese vampires appeared on the streets. They looked like zombies, but had vampire properties. They drank energy. The self-proclaimed leader of the team excitedly called for battle. Everyone rushed forward. Jake compared himself to the bespectacled guy and asked if he had ever fought Chinese vampires. The guy snorted contemptuously. He said there was nothing extraordinary about them, especially compared to the undead monsters. Jake realized that he was underestimating his opponent, and that was already dangerous. He shouted to the boy that Chinese vampires were also undead, but the boy pretended not to hear. He led his team forward. One of the players was the first to attack the evil spirits. With a scream, he impaled one of them on his sword. And suddenly he discovered something strange. The sword didn't work. The boy shouted for everyone to be careful because the sword would not harm enemies. The glasses guy turned out to be a magician. He shouted for the team to retreat because he would attack with magic. He raised his magic wand and struck. The explosion enveloped the battlefield in thick smoke for several seconds, and then the monsters emerged from the smoke unharmed. The magic had no effect on them, but the magician cried out for help, because his aggression was reflected from the enemy and hit him. But no one paid any attention to his screams. After some time, the bespectacled man came to, although he no longer hoped to survive. Jake was glad of the weapon. The filth had a very strong body, and without a good weapon it was not easy to deal with them. But if these abominations attacked together, it would be impossible. The players were amazed at how easily the guy could deal with Chinese vampires. Unbelievable. One blow and the vampire's head was gone. And they said that this evil spirit had high defense. It seems that the guy's attack is higher than their defense. All this angered the bespectacled man. He shouted at Jake why he didn't protect the magician if he had such abilities. He also accused him of showing off. This was already too much. Jake stopped abruptly, turned around, and stared the four-eyed man straight in the eyes with a predatory gaze. He backed away and started to babble in fear, saying that he didn't mean anything bad, that we had to work together as a team. Jake thought sarcastically that the awards were individual, so what kind of collaboration could there be? Meanwhile, the players in the thick of the battle called for support. Jake looked in their direction and was shocked. There were so many vampires. Where did so many of them come from? The team of magicians decided that they needed to retreat because the fighters could not withstand such an invasion of the evil one. Okolaric was frightened by these circumstances, and at the same time, he enviously thought that the other squads of players were probably successfully completing the tasks. Jake paid no attention to them. Even when the bespectacled man was telling him that this was his 6th time here, it became clear that a mage who hadn't passed level 300 in 3 years was the worst of the worst. The boy froze for a moment, surveying the jumble of fighters and monsters. Then, casting aside his doubts, he fearlessly charged into the thick of it. He relentlessly wielded his sword so that the vampires' heads flew like balls. One of the players couldn't believe his eyes. Is it really possible to kill a monster with one blow? He himself had struck dozens of times, and to no avail. Someone nearby replied that this was the same famous newcomer who had passed through the ancient ruins. And there was also a rumor that he hadn't even reached level 200 yet. Jake went into a frenzy, mowing down vampires like a madman. The rest of the players stopped and just watched in fascination. The guy with glasses saw all this too, and he thought sadly that the guy's level was lower than his own, and yet he was doing something like this. After killing another vampire, the system notified Jake of a level increase. He was happy to have the opportunity to improve both his level and experience. However, looking around, he realized that he was standing alone, and all the vampires were flocking only to him. It was stressful. He understood that he would be doomed if he was surrounded, and his health was not infinite. He had to come up with something urgently. The idea came instantly. Jake jumped out of the crowd and found himself on the roof of a large bus. It was more convenient to look at the situation from above. And the evil spirits were there to hell. Much more than he had imagined. A massive attack would have been useful here. And it's actually a pretty good idea. Paranet had it. What's more, the skill was S rank. One of the vampires was approaching Jake on the roof. The boy was afraid they would jump. And indeed some of them did. He got rid of the cold in a second. There was no point in wasting any more time. He summoned Paranet. He appeared instantly. He helpfully asked why the owner had called. At the same time, he stumbled and almost fell into the crowd of vampires. Jake managed to intercept him at the last moment. Paranet, as usual, was screaming in panic that he was going to die. Jake angrily ordered them to stop talking nonsense and immediately use the detonate corpse skill. Paranet liked this idea. Continuing to dangle his legs in the air, he immediately put it into practice. The explosion was colossal. The dwarves above knelt, unable to avert their admiring gazes from the events below. Jake was pressed against the wall and blinking. He hadn't expected such a grandiose effect. It was a good thing he had managed to get to the roof of the house and dodge. But what is this? Vampires continued to creep down the street. True, in the opposite direction. They were retreating. The boy stared at Paranet, asking where he was aiming. The enemy was so crowded that one blow could have destroyed them all, and he missed. Paranet made excuses. He was too confused by the extraordinary circumstances. His appearance was pitiful, and his size was that of a toy. It was a form of recharging mode. All the magical energy had been used up. Jake was upset. There was no need to count on a second volley until the energy was restored. Paranet is undead, so potions won't help him. Can we just wait for automatic recovery? The system reported that there were 370 Chinese vampires left. Jake decided to take a look at his stats window and found 204 unallocated points. If he waits for Paranet's mana to recover, he can forget about first place. So don't skimp. You should use these points for agility. To make the most of his SSS-class sword skills, it was precisely agility that was needed. Jake wanted to win, to gain all the rewards and experience. He tried to get used to the new characteristics and practiced a little with the sword. I liked the result of the test. My body felt much lighter. I could go on the attack. The Paranet was recharged by 30%. Jake ordered him to continue, and on the signal, to use the corpse detonation once. He nodded, saying he understood everything. And Jake headed towards the monsters, jumping off the roof. Landing on his feet, the boy found himself behind the unclean spirit. One of them noticed Jake, and the rest of them followed him and began to turn and change direction. Looks like Jake landed too noisily, but he didn't want to miss the chance to collect experience points, so he boldly prepared to meet the enemies. When they approached, the boy rushed at them, cutting off their heads one by one. But the vampires weren't completely stupid. Sensing danger, those in the back rows began to turn and flee. Jake wasn't happy with this. He ran ahead and lured them towards him. He ordered Paranet to attack as soon as the undead gathered. The Paranet faithfully carried out the order. Another fiery explosion swept through the city streets. The fire consumed everything in its path. Meanwhile, nearby, one of the players was summing up her hunt. She had destroyed 31 vampires. It's good to have met such a large, fast-moving group. This increases the chances of getting into the ranking. However, you will have to look for another place to hunt, because there are too few unclean ones left here. The other players, noticing the explosion, froze and watched the events in fascination. The girl who was counting her achievements didn't immediately realize where everyone was looking, but then she saw it and wiped it away. The system sent everyone a message congratulating them on successfully completing the task. It said that rewards would be given according to their rating. A heated discussion broke out in the crowd. Who did it? Who is this person? It looks like it's the newbie from the viral video. The winners were announced. Greg took third place with 24 undead killed. Nancy took second place with 31 creatures. First place went to Jake, who at that moment was standing on a mountain of corpses. The boy scanned his report. The number of vampires he had killed was 369. No one on the team believed it. The number seemed unrealistic. Could one player do that? The boy explained to Paranet that everyone the skeleton had killed with his skill had been credited to Jake. Paranet was glad that he had been able to serve his master. Nancy bit her lip. She, a mage, lost to some swordsman. This despite the fact that her equipment had been improved with the support of the guild. Her hands clenched into fists involuntarily. She was sure she could fly high. And here this guy, who hadn't even reached level 200, single-handedly dealt with 369 monsters. The system beeped that the player who destroyed the most Chinese vampires would receive a special reward. Jake froze in joyful anticipation. For first place, he received the essence of agility. The guy decided to use it right away. The system continued to announce that Jake's special reward would be an A-rank ice field. Fantastic! Obtaining an A-rank magic skill at level 157 is beyond imagination. The boy almost danced with delight. How good that he is taking part in the competition. He must definitely win the next task. His thoughts were interrupted by a timid voice calling out to him. Jake is back. All the players gathered behind him. They asked which guild the guy was planning to join and competed with each other to offer to join them. The girls asked to exchange contacts. They invited me to a women's guild called Royanda, where not every man was accepted. Jake blushed from the excessive attention, which he was not used to. He explained that he did not plan to join anywhere in the near future, but he would not mind exchanging contacts. He was immediately bombarded with requests to add him on Messenger. The guy was stressed out, but he had to confirm all the requests. If anything, he would delete it later. The system announced the need to prepare for the start of the second task. Everyone stared intently at the screens, waiting for details. Players were then told that all survivors would be transported to a random location for the next mission. There was not enough clarity. But the second task had already begun. The player had to rescue Troy, who was locked in a maze. The reward would go to the first person to find Troy. Hunting points would be awarded for destroying other races in the maze. More points meant a better reward. Jake entered the portal. He understood that this was a difficult task for him because he was not a good searcher, and he also did not like the fact that interracial conflicts were being provoked. It was low and mean. He reached the labyrinth. I remembered the bespectacled man's words about hunting being easy. If only it weren't a maze. Now it seemed like a prophecy. But then Jake remembered Paranet. Although he himself is not very good at mazes, Paranet must help. He sent the skeleton to scout out which path of the maze was dangerous. He hoped that the skeleton's survival instinct would help. Paranet told Jake not to expect miracles because it was a difficult task. Then he went into the labyrinth. He felt an unusual energy on one side and told the owner about it. The guy asked if this energy was dangerous. The skeleton confirmed that it was better not to go that way, but Jake headed that way. Paranet hissed angrily that it was the wrong way. The guy waved it away. He seemed to understand, but he didn't turn back. Jake walked ahead. Paranet next to him whined that he should turn back because it was dangerous here. But Jake wasn't going to listen to him. He needed to go into danger, because there he could get a good reward. He didn't notice someone whispering behind him that the guy was crazy, wandering alone in a maze during an interracial war. After getting a little confused in the corridors, Jake suddenly stopped at one of the many turns. His path was blocked by shaggy creatures. They stared at Jake and argued over who would get this loot. They were the masters of magic, a holy race. One of them threw fire at the boy, shouting that the points would go to him. The explosion flashed with a bright glow. The magic master rushed to the scene of the explosion. He thought that humans were a stupid race, because this guy died and didn't even have time to react to the attack. But the points didn't add up, and there was no human body. Maybe the body just threw it away. Suddenly a noise behind the creature made him turn around. Both of his companions were dead. Jake stood over them with his trusty sword. He slipped away unnoticed thanks to his agility while the magic master was searching for his body. The shaggy master was puzzled. How strong is this guy? But he never found out about it because death came before he could finish his thought. The system notified Jake of receiving hunting points. He thought that creating a group of 3 mages was stupid. These magic masters were not very skilled even in the game. Nothing had changed in this world. Paranet peeked out cautiously, apprehensively from around the corner. Jake asked if he still felt in danger. He said mysteriously and menacingly that the threat had not even begun yet. The real danger would be at the end of the journey. The guy just laughed and replied that he was looking forward to it. They went on. Paranet did not hesitate. Why did the owner ignore his advice? And then he felt a threat. On the right, the sound of a blow. The threat was now on the left. And another blow, still on the left. A groan. Jake quickly dealt with the attacker. His hunting points have already exceeded 10,000. Paranet finally calmed down a bit. Yes, there was a real danger ahead, but the master had such power that he didn't need to be afraid. Jake was looking forward to when it would come, the real danger. The skeleton assured him that it would be soon. The system reported that the player who scored more than 10,000 points would soon receive the next challenge. Jake stopped. He felt the floor give way under his feet. The stonework beneath him began to crumble before his eyes, forming a hole. Jake's eyes lit up with joy. That's what he thought. The key to the mission was the hunting goggles. The system issued a message that he had approached the abyss where the target player was, so the maze was just a decoy. And Jake guessed absolutely correctly that it was about collecting points. Finding himself at the bottom of the abyss into which he had fallen from the labyrinth, Jake looked around. In the game, the abyss became available when the guy reached level 400, and it was very difficult there. But the tournament is organized for players up to level 300, so it turns out that this is an imitation of the abyss? Stepping forward, Jake pondered until he came across a monster. The creature vaguely resembled a spider. In addition to a pair of arms, it had several pairs of long tentacles. The guy froze in shock. Is this really a real abyss? The monster ordered them to stop, otherwise it would kill the uninvited visitor. The system suggested that Jake had encountered Horadin, who was guarding the entrance to the abyss. Horadin is a very strong guard. It is recommended to fight him with a squad of at least 6 people. The guy thought for a moment. He knew that to fight Horadin, you had to be at least level 400. And the system only now talks about a group. Where can you get that group now? But then Jake remembered how the other players had boasted that they had accidentally figured out how to defeat the guard. But what exactly were they talking about? Go ahead? An eye on the forehead? Hardly. It's on the forehead that the eye is stronger. Jake ran through his mind, but he couldn't think of anything. The monster wasn't attacking first, so he had time to think. He stood opposite the guard and recalled with great effort. His memory must have been improved. Suddenly he noticed that something flashed on one of the monster's fingers. Jake was enlightened. The ring. Exactly. That's what the gamers were talking about. For Horadin, the ring is a source of power. You need to damage the ring and then weaken the guard. But the players found a trick. You could only destroy the ring. This made it possible to deal with the guard alone. Jake was glad he had managed to remember everything. He took out the scroll of dismounting equipment from his inventory. This scroll could send one item of an opponent's equipment to their inventory. The cunning strategy must have worked. Jake aimed the scroll at the monster. The system reported that the target was set to Horadin. The monster grinned, but remained where it was. The boy knew that if the monster didn't attack first, he would just stand there and watch as the debuff was applied. The ring slipped from the guard's finger and rolled, clanging across the floor. If it fell, then the monster doesn't have the inventory to throw the ring there, which means you need to summon Paranet. Paranet broke free. He didn't understand why it was so dark everywhere, but then he noticed the monster, screamed in fear, but rushed after the ring. Because that's what his master ordered him to do. Paranet caught it and showed it to Jake. Mission accomplished. Horadin roared and turned towards the thief. Paranet realized the situation he was in and rushed away. The guard threw out a giant long arm to grab the thief. The skeleton activated its evasion skill and avoided disaster. The monster pounded his fist on the rocks and the floor in impotent rage. His strength was quickly leaving him. He understood this and was furious. The sentry began to shrink, like a deflated balloon. Jake realized that the monster was now large enough to use a sword. He attacked Horadin, striking him with a dozen blows. They all hit the target exactly and caused damage to the monster. The guy was eagerly awaiting the finale. And the finale was not long in coming. The guard let out a final growl, spitting blood, and fell dead. The system wrote that the level had been increased, and the mythical title, He for Whom Nothing is Impossible, and the legendary title, Conqueror of Horadin, had been obtained. Jake breathed a sigh of relief. How good it was that the trick had worked, and how wonderful that he had managed to remember it. Additionally, the guy received the Essence of Health and the Pass to the Abyss. But why wasn't he immediately moved to the Abyss? Maybe it's just an item that fell on the event map? The guy decided to use the Essence of Health right away. He checked the stats. They all increased by a total of 14%, and the overall defense increased by 10%. Excellent results. The characteristics turned out to be worthy of the mythical title. Paranet approached from afar. Jake greeted him joyfully, but the skeleton was belligerent. He declared that the boy was a real tyrant, because a normal master wouldn't abandon his subordinate to a monster for some item. Jake weakly denied that he had good stamina, and asked to hand over the ring. Paranet was still grumbling, but he gave the trophy. As soon as it was in Jake's palm, it shrank to the size of a boy. The system provided information that the Ring of Horadin increases all of the wearer's characteristics by an amount equal to their magical power. Jake was overcome with happiness. The properties of the mythical object were amazing. But the joy turned to disappointment. The next message informed the player that the item could not be equipped. This was a bummer. But why is the object inaccessible? Could it have been attached to Paranet? The boy looked closely at the skeleton. It squealed in fear. Suddenly, the system signaled that a serious error had occurred in the labyrinth location. The second task was forcibly completed. Jake froze. Was it because of his tricks? The answer was in the next notification. The irregular player Michael was eliminated from the tournament. The third task was to begin in 5 minutes. The guy thought that Michael must be a cool guy. He got into the system once. It was interesting, but it was a good thing the game wasn't paused because of Jake. He and Paranet were already standing in the center of the portal. The third task was about to begin. It consisted of a confrontation between factions and was group-based. The system briefly explained the rules. Participants were randomly divided into 2 factions. A special reward would go to the one who made the most significant contribution. In assessing a player's achievements and merits, the basis was what the faction commander personally saw or heard. Jake didn't find the task difficult. At least it was better than wandering through a maze. The boy was assigned to the laziness faction. The pride faction opposed it. Jake quickly began to notice that he had to find the commander and stay in his line of sight, because it was the commander who was responsible for scoring points. Stupid system. It turned out that you can kill a bunch of enemies, but if the commander doesn't see it, you're left with no points. In the camp of the Lin faction, everyone was looking for the commander. One by one, the players shouted if anyone had seen the commander, but in vain. Suddenly, a voice came from the crowd telling them to stop shouting because she didn't really want to be the commander. Everyone looked around, searching for the owner of the voice. A child came forward. She called them stupid and declared that she was the commander. The players couldn't believe it. They asked each other how this was possible and whether a child could command the battle. The girl firmly declared that she was the one in charge, no matter what anyone else thought about it. One of the boys mockingly asked how she was going to fight, risking her life. The girl was not confused. She replied that there was no risk because players don't die. But then she said that she was humiliated by communicating with such idiots, so she was going to bed. The players were shocked. They looked at each other and could not believe that this was reality. Turning around, the girl advised them to go and rest. They said they had to live up to the name of the faction. Everyone shouted indignantly that the faction was doomed to lose. Jake watched the action and realized that the mission, which had seemed simple, had suddenly become fraught with problems. It was necessary to somehow change the mood of that lazy little girl.